The twin massacres at Istvan III and Istvan V left the galaxy reeling, their aftershocks rippling through the Imperium like cracks in a shattered mirror. Among the countless dead lay not only the loyalist legions that had been betrayed, but also those warriors within the traitor legions who had remained true to the Emperor's vision. These survivors, scattered and broken, found themselves cast adrift in a galaxy suddenly turned hostile, their own gene fathers having branded them as enemies for their refusal to embrace the corruption of chaos. The virus bombing of Istvan III had been intended as a clean slate, a surgical removal of those elements within the Sons of Horus, Emperor's children, Death Guard, and World Eaters who might resist Horus's rebellion. Yet the War Master's plan, for all its calculated brutality, had not accounted for the tenacity of those who served the Emperor above all else. Pockets of loyalists had survived the initial assault, fighting desperately in the ruins of the Coral City and across the planet's devastated surface. Captain Saul Tarvitz of the Emperor's Children, ancient Rylaner of the same legion, and Captain Nathaniel Garrow of the Death Guard had emerged as focal points of resistance, rallying their loyal brothers against impossible odds. The survivors of these purges faced a unique and terrible burden. They were warriors without a legion, cast out by their own gene fathers and viewed with suspicion by their former allies. The psychological trauma of such betrayal ran deeper than any physical wound. These men had been conditioned from their earliest days as aspirants to revere their primarchs as living gods, to find their identity and purpose within the brotherhood of their legion, to discover that their fathers had fallen to corruption, that their very genetic heritage had been tainted by association with treachery created wounds that would never fully heal. Captain Nathaniel Garrow's escape aboard the frigate Eisenstein represented more than a simple flight from certain death. As the Death Guard fleet prepared to bombard Istvan III with the Life Eater virus, Garrow had made the agonizing decision to abandon his legion and his gene father Mortarion. The Eisenstein's desperate journey through the warp, pursued by Death Guard vessels and beset by demonic incursions, had been a crucible that tested not only Garrow's resolve, but also that of his companions. Battle Captain Eacton Cruz of the Sons of Horus, Remembrancer Mercedes Olatin, and the surviving members of Garrow's company had endured horrors that would have broken lesser minds. The frigate's arrival at Terra marked a turning point in the nascent civil war. Garrow's testimony before the Council of Terra, delivered with the weight of absolute certainty, confirmed the worst fears of those who had suspected Horus's growing corruption. The War Master's betrayal was no longer a matter of speculation or political maneuvering. It was a stark reality that demanded immediate action. The Emperor's withdrawal to his secret laboratories beneath the Imperial Palace had left the day-to-day governance of the Imperium in the hands of Malcador the Sigillite, and it was the ancient Psyker who grasped the full implications of Garrow's report. Malcador had served as the Emperor's right hand for millennia, his ageless mind capable of seeing patterns and possibilities that escaped even the most gifted of his contemporaries. The news of Horus's betrayal, while devastating, also presented opportunities for those wise enough to recognize them. The Sigillite understood that the coming war would not be won through conventional means alone. The traitor legions possessed half of the Imperium's military might, commanded by primarchs whose tactical genius was matched only by their intimate knowledge of loyalist doctrine and capabilities. Victory would require new approaches, new weapons, and new kinds of warriors. The concept that would eventually become the Knights-Errant began to take shape in Malcador's mind during those dark days following Garrow's arrival. The traditional structures of the Imperium, the legions, the Imperial Army, the various branches of the bureaucracy, had proven vulnerable to corruption and infiltration. What was needed was a force that operated outside these established hierarchies, answerable only to the highest levels of imperial authority, and capable of undertaking missions that conventional forces could not or would not attempt. Garrow himself represented the ideal candidate for such an organization. His loyalty to the Emperor had proven stronger than his bonds to his legion, his gene father, or his former brothers. The trials he had endured during the Eisenstein's journey had tested his faith and found it unbreakable. More importantly, his willingness to abandon everything he had known in service of a higher truth demonstrated the kind of psychological flexibility that would be essential for the tasks ahead. The Sigillite's initial approach to recruitment reflected his understanding of the unique challenges facing the Imperium. Traditional markers of worth, combat prowess, tactical acumen, leadership ability remained important, but they were secondary to the fundamental question of loyalty. The Knights-Errant would need to be men capable of operating in isolation, of making decisions without the support structure of their legions, of facing corruption and heresy without flinching. They would need to be warriors who could look upon their own gene fathers and, if necessary, stand against them. The aftermath of Istvan V provided additional candidates for Malcador's consideration. The drop site massacre had shattered 3 loyal legions, the Iron Hands, Salamanders, and Raven Guard, leaving scattered survivors struggling to regroup and continue the fight. These warriors, traumatized by the betrayal of their supposed allies and the loss of their primarchs, represented a pool of potential recruits who had already proven their loyalty under the most extreme circumstances. The psychological profile of successful Knights-Errant candidates began to emerge from these early observations. They were invariably men who had experienced profound loss or betrayal, who had been forced to confront the failure of institutions they had trusted implicitly. This trauma, rather than breaking them, had instead refined their understanding of what truly mattered. They had learned to distinguish between loyalty to individuals or organizations and loyalty to the ideals those entities were supposed to represent. The selection process itself was necessarily secretive and highly selective. Malcador could not simply issue recruitment orders through normal imperial channels. The very existence of the Knights-Errant needed to remain hidden from all but the most trusted individuals. Instead, potential candidates were identified through careful observation and subtle testing. Their responses to moral dilemmas, their behavior under stress, their ability to maintain their principles in the face of overwhelming pressure, all of these factors were evaluated by agents of the Sigillite's growing network. The diversity of backgrounds among the early Knights-Errant reflected Malcador's understanding that the challenges ahead would require a variety of skills and perspectives. While the majority came from the Astartes legions, the organization also included mortal humans whose particular talents made them valuable assets. The common thread was not their origin or their capabilities, but their demonstrated capacity for independent thought and uncompromising loyalty to the Emperor's vision for humanity. The physical and mental conditioning required to transform these candidates into effective Knights-Errant went far beyond standard Astartes training. The traditional legion structure provided its members with a clear hierarchy, defined roles, and the support of their battle brothers. Knights-Errant would often operate alone or in small groups, making decisions that could affect the course of the war without the benefit of consultation or oversight. They needed to be capable of functioning as complete warriors, tacticians, investigators, diplomats, and killers as circumstances demanded. The early missions assigned to the Knights-Errant reflected their unique capabilities and the desperate nature of the Imperium's situation. While the main body of loyalist forces prepared for the inevitable assault on Terra, the Knights-Errant undertook tasks that conventional forces could not attempt. They infiltrated traitor-held worlds to gather intelligence, eliminated key enemy figures through targeted assassination, and worked to maintain communication networks between scattered loyalist forces. Their actions, while often small in scale, had effects that rippled throughout the larger conflict. The psychological burden of their role was immense. Knights-Errant were required to make decisions that would have been unthinkable under normal circumstances, to sacrifice their former identities and allegiances in service of a greater cause. They operated in a moral gray area where the traditional codes of honor and brotherhood that defined Astartes' culture no longer applied. The weight of this responsibility, combined with the isolation inherent in their missions, created unique stresses that required careful management. Malcador's vision for the Knights-Errant extended beyond their immediate utility in the Horus Heresy. The Sigillite understood that the war, regardless of its outcome, would fundamentally change the nature of the Imperium. The old certainties, the unquestioned loyalty to the primarchs, the assumption that the Emperor's sons would always remain true, all of these had been shattered by Horus's betrayal. The Imperium that emerged from the conflict would need new institutions, new safeguards against corruption, and new kinds of servants capable of operating in a more complex and dangerous galaxy. The recruitment of Eacton crews, the half-herd of the Sons of Horus, exemplified the challenges and opportunities facing the nascent organization. Cruz had been marginalized within his own legion, his old-fashioned adherence to the original ideals of the Great Crusade, marking him as increasingly irrelevant in Horus's eyes. Yet it was precisely this stubborn adherence to principle that made him valuable to Malcador. Cruz's intimate knowledge of Sons of Horus doctrine and personnel, combined with his unshakable loyalty to the Emperor, made him an ideal candidate for missions requiring deep understanding of Traitor Legion capabilities. The transformation of these warriors from Legion members to Knights-Errant required more than simple reassignment. Their very identities had to be reconstructed, their psychological foundations rebuilt on new principles. The process was neither quick nor easy, and not all candidates proved capable of making the transition. Some, despite their demonstrated loyalty, could not adapt to the isolation and moral ambiguity of their new role. Others found the weight of their responsibilities too great to bear, the constant awareness of their former brother's betrayal eating away at their sanity. The ancient corridors beneath the Imperial Palace had witnessed countless strategic deliberations throughout the millennia, but none carried the weight of those conducted in the wake of Garro's testimony. Malcador the Sigillite moved through these shadowed halls with the measured pace of one who had learned to think in centuries rather than moments, his ageless features betraying nothing of the revolutionary concepts taking shape within his mind. The traditional structures that had served the Imperium during the Great Crusade were proving inadequate to the challenges posed by the Horus Heresy, and the master of the Administratum understood that survival would require fundamental changes to how the Emperor's will was enacted across the galaxy. The Sigillite's vision extended far beyond the immediate crisis of the Civil War. While others focused on troop movements and supply lines, Malcador contemplated the shape of the Imperium that would emerge from the ashes of betrayal. The primarchs, once considered the Emperor's greatest achievement, had proven fallible in ways that shook the very foundations of imperial doctrine. Half of them had turned traitor, taking their legions with them into damnation. Even among those who remained loyal, the psychological trauma of fratricide would leave lasting scars. The Imperium could no longer rely on the unquestioned loyalty of gene-crafted demigods and their superhuman progeny. The concept of warriors bound by oath directly to the throne, rather than to any intermediary authority, represented a radical departure from established imperial hierarchy. The Astartes legions had been organized around the principle of absolute loyalty to their primarchs, with the Emperor serving as the ultimate but distant authority. This structure had proven catastrophically vulnerable to corruption at the highest levels. Malcador envisioned a different kind of warrior, one whose loyalty transcended personal bonds and genetic inheritance, anchored instead in philosophical commitment to the Emperor's vision for humanity. The theological implications of such a shift were profound. The imperial truth, with its emphasis on reason and rejection of superstition, had already begun to crack under the weight of revelations about the warp and the entities that dwelt within it. The Knights-Errant would need to operate in a reality where demons were demonstrably real, where the immaterial realm could intrude upon the physical universe with devastating effect. Their loyalty could not be based solely on rational appreciation of the Emperor's secular philosophy. It would need to encompass a deeper understanding of his role as humanity's protector against existential threats that conventional imperial doctrine had barely acknowledged. Malcador's recruitment philosophy reflected his understanding that the coming struggle would be fought on multiple fronts simultaneously. The Knights-Errant would need to be capable of operating within the existing imperial bureaucracy while remaining fundamentally separate from it. They would serve as the Sigillite's eyes and hands in situations where conventional authority structures had failed or been compromised. This required individuals who could navigate complex political situations, understand the motivations of various imperial factions, and maintain their core mission focus despite external pressures. The integration of the Knights-Errant with existing imperial institutions presented unique challenges that demanded careful consideration. The Officio Assassinorum, with its ancient traditions and specialized training regimens, represented one potential model for how elite warriors could serve the throne directly. The assassin temples had maintained their independence from the Astartes legions throughout the Great Crusade, answering only to the highest levels of imperial authority. Their operatives were conditioned from childhood to view their missions as sacred duties, transcending personal desires or loyalties. Yet the Knights-Errant would need to operate in ways that the Assassinorum could not. Where assassins were highly specialized instruments designed for specific types of missions, the Knights-Errant would need to be adaptable generalists capable of responding to unpredictable situations. They would serve as troubleshooters, investigators, and diplomatic agents as circumstances demanded. Their Astartes physiology and training provided them with capabilities that no mortal assassin could match, but their true value lay in their ability to think independently and make complex moral judgments without detailed instructions. The nascent Inquisition, still in its earliest conceptual stages within Malcador's planning, offered another model for how the Knights-Errant might function within the broader imperial structure. The Sigillite had begun to envision an organization dedicated to rooting out corruption and heresy before it could spread, staffed by individuals with the authority to investigate any imperial institution or individual. The Knights-Errant would serve as the prototype for such an organization, testing methods and approaches that could later be systematized and expanded. The philosophical underpinnings of absolute loyalty to the emperors will require careful examination of what such loyalty actually meant in practical terms. The emperor himself had withdrawn from direct involvement in imperial governance, focusing his attention on the mysterious project beneath the palace. His will had to be interpreted and implemented by others, creating inevitable questions about authority and legitimacy. Malcador understood that the Knights-Errant would need to be capable of distinguishing between the emperor's true intentions and the potentially corrupted interpretations of those who claimed to speak in his name. This challenge was particularly acute given the nature of chaos corruption. The ruinous powers were subtle in their approach, often working through seemingly loyal individuals who genuinely believed they were serving the emperor's interests. The Knights-Errant would need to develop an almost supernatural sensitivity to such influences, learning to recognize the signs of corruption in themselves and others. This required not just intellectual understanding, but a kind of spiritual fortitude that went beyond conventional military training. The recruitment process for the Knights-Errant reflected these complex requirements. Malcador could not simply select the most accomplished warriors from the loyal legions. Such individuals might possess the necessary combat skills, but lack the psychological flexibility required for their new role. Instead, he looked for those who had demonstrated the ability to think beyond the constraints of their original training, who had shown initiative in challenging situations, and who possessed an intuitive understanding of the Emperor's broader vision for humanity. The diversity of backgrounds among potential recruits created both opportunities and challenges. Warriors from different legions brought varying perspectives and capabilities, but they also carried the cultural biases and doctrinal limitations of their origins. A space wolf would approach problems differently than an ultramarine, and both would think differently than a raven guard. The Knights-Errant would need to transcend these differences while still utilizing the unique strengths that each tradition provided. The training regimen developed for the Knights-Errant went far beyond conventional military instruction. They needed to understand the political structures of the Imperium, the motivations of various human cultures, and the nature of the threats posed by chaos. This education included exposure to carefully controlled information about the warp and its inhabitants, knowledge that was considered too dangerous for most Imperial citizens, but essential for those who would be fighting corruption at its source. The psychological conditioning required to create effective Knights-Errant was perhaps the most challenging aspect of their development. These warriors had to be capable of operating in isolation for extended periods, making life and death decisions without the support structure provided by their original legions. They needed to maintain their sanity while confronting horrors that would break lesser minds, and they had to resist the subtle influences of chaos while remaining effective in combat against its servants. The operational doctrine emerging from Malcador's vision emphasized flexibility and adaptability over rigid adherence to established protocols. Knights-Errant would be given broad objectives rather than detailed instructions, expected to use their judgment in determining the best approach to any given situation. This required a level of independence that was unusual within imperial military culture, where clear chains of command and detailed orders were the norm. The relationship between the Knights-Errant and existing imperial institutions required careful management to avoid conflicts of authority. The Sigillite understood that his new organization could not simply override established hierarchies without creating dangerous instabilities. Instead, the Knights-Errant would need to work within existing structures when possible, using their unique status to access information and resources that might otherwise be unavailable. The theological framework supporting the Knights-Errant drew upon ancient Terran traditions of sacred oaths and divine service, concepts that predated the imperial truth but had never been entirely suppressed. The Emperor's role as the master of mankind took on new dimensions when viewed through this lens, encompassing not just political authority, but a kind of spiritual guardianship over the human species. The Knights-Errant would serve as the instruments of this guardianship, protecting humanity from threats that conventional military forces could not address. The practical implications of this theological shift were significant. Knights-Errant would need to be capable of recognizing and countering supernatural threats, understanding the nature of psychic phenomena, and maintaining their spiritual integrity in the face of chaos corruption. This required a synthesis of rational military training with more esoteric knowledge, creating warriors who could function effectively in both the material and immaterial realms. The selection criteria for Knights-Errant reflected these complex requirements. Malcador looked for individuals who had demonstrated not just courage and skill in battle, but also moral clarity in difficult situations. The ability to make hard choices, to sacrifice personal desires for the greater good, and to maintain hope in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds were all essential qualities. These characteristics could not be taught through conventional training. They had to be inherent in the individual's character. The integration of mortal humans into the Knights-Errant organization reflected Malcador's understanding that the challenges ahead would require diverse perspectives and capabilities. While Astartes possessed obvious advantages in terms of physical prowess and combat effectiveness, mortals brought different strengths to the organization. Their shorter lifespans created a sense of urgency that could be valuable in time-sensitive situations, and their closer connection to baseline humanity provided insights that superhuman warriors might miss. The operational security surrounding the Knights-Errant was necessarily extensive. The very existence of the organization had to be kept secret from all but the most trusted individuals, as knowledge of their activities could compromise their effectiveness or provide enemies with valuable intelligence. This secrecy extended to the Knights-Errant themselves, who were often unaware of the full scope of their organization or the identities of their fellow operatives. The command structure developed for the Knights-Errant reflected the need for both central coordination and operational independence. While Malcador maintained overall authority over the organization, individual Knights-Errant were given considerable latitude in how they accomplished their missions. This decentralized approach reduced the risk of catastrophic failure if any single element of the organization was compromised, while still allowing for coordinated action when circumstances required it. The long-term vision for the Knights-Errant extended beyond the immediate crisis of the Horus Heresy. Malcador understood that the Imperium would face similar challenges in the future, requiring institutions capable of adapting to new threats while maintaining their core mission focus. The Knights-Errant would serve as the foundation for these future organizations, their experiences and methods providing the template for how the Emperor's will could be enacted in an increasingly dangerous galaxy. The identification of suitable candidates for the Knights-Errant required a fundamental shift in how the Imperium evaluated its warriors. Traditional assessments focused on combat prowess, tactical acumen, and adherence to Legion doctrine, metrics that had served well during the Great Crusade but proved inadequate for the unique challenges posed by the Horus Heresy. Malcador's agents operated with entirely different criteria, seeking individuals whose psychological profiles suggested they could transcend the bonds of genetic loyalty and institutional conditioning that had proven so catastrophically vulnerable to corruption. The process began with careful observation of loyalist survivors from the traitor legions, particularly those who had demonstrated exceptional resistance to the philosophical shifts that had preceded open rebellion. Intelligence networks maintained by the Sigillite's operatives monitored communications from scattered Imperial forces, identifying individuals whose actions or statements suggested they possessed the mental flexibility required for service as Knights-Errant. These initial assessments were necessarily conducted from a distance, as direct contact with potential candidates carried significant risks of exposure or infiltration. The psychological evaluation procedures developed for potential Knights-Errant drew upon millennia of Imperial experience in assessing human nature under extreme stress. The assessors, themselves carefully selected for their ability to recognize subtle indicators of character and motivation, employed techniques that went far beyond conventional interrogation methods. They observed how candidates responded to moral dilemmas, how they processed information that challenged their fundamental assumptions, and how they maintained their sense of purpose when stripped of the institutional support structures that had previously defined their existence. One of the most revealing aspects of these evaluations involved presenting candidates with hypothetical scenarios that required them to choose between competing loyalties. A warrior who had served faithfully in the Death Guard might be asked to consider what they would do if ordered to execute a fellow Astartes suspected of corruption, but lacking definitive proof of guilt. The candidate's response revealed not just their moral reasoning, but their capacity for independent thought and their willingness to accept personal responsibility for difficult decisions. The testing procedures also incorporated elements designed to assess resistance to chaos corruption. Candidates were exposed to carefully controlled psychic influences while being monitored for signs of mental instability or spiritual weakness. These tests were conducted under the supervision of sanctioned psychers who could immediately intervene if any subject showed signs of succumbing to malevolent influence. The ability to maintain mental clarity and moral focus while under supernatural pressure proved to be one of the most reliable indicators of suitability for service as a Knight-Errant. Physical endurance remained important, but the emphasis shifted toward evaluating how candidates performed when operating in isolation rather than as part of a larger unit. Traditional Astartes training emphasized coordination with battle brothers, mutual support, and adherence to established tactical doctrines. Knights-Errant needed to be capable of functioning effectively when deprived of these advantages, making split-second decisions without the benefit of consultation or backup. The testing regimen included extended periods of solitary operation under simulated combat conditions, with candidates required to complete complex objectives while maintaining operational security and avoiding detection. The role of existing Knights-Errant in the recruitment process became increasingly important as the organization expanded beyond its initial core membership. Veterans like Nathaniel Garrow and Eacton Cruz possessed intimate knowledge of the psychological pressures and operational challenges that new recruits would face. Their insights proved invaluable in refining the selection criteria and identifying subtle indicators that might escape the notice of even experienced assessors who lacked direct experience with the unique demands of service as a Knight-Errant. Garrow's involvement in the vetting process brought a particularly valuable perspective, as his experience with the corruption of the Death Guard had given him an almost supernatural ability to detect the early signs of chaos influence. His assessments of potential candidates carried significant weight with Malcador's staff, as his recommendations had proven remarkably accurate in predicting which individuals would successfully adapt to their new role and which would struggle with the psychological demands of operating outside traditional Legion structures. The sponsorship system that developed around veteran Knights-Errant served multiple purposes beyond simple recruitment. It provided new members with mentorship and guidance during their transition period, helping them navigate the complex psychological adjustments required to function effectively in their new role. More importantly, it created a network of mutual accountability that helped maintain the organization's integrity and resist potential infiltration by enemy agents or corrupted individuals. The extraction of Tylos Rubio from the ruins of Prospero represented one of the most significant early recruitment successes for the Knights-Errant. Rubio, a codiceer of the Thousand Sons, had found himself in an impossible position following the censure of his legion at the Council of Nicaea and the subsequent attack on his homeworld by the Space Wolves. His psychic abilities, once valued as tools for advancing the Great Crusade, had become sources of suspicion and fear among many Imperial forces. Yet these same abilities made him invaluable for the kinds of missions that the Knights-Errant would be called upon to undertake. The operation to secure Rubio's services required careful coordination between multiple Imperial agencies and demonstrated the growing influence of Malcador's organization within the broader Imperial hierarchy. Intelligence operatives identified Rubio's location among the scattered survivors of the Thousand Sons, while diplomatic channels were used to negotiate his transfer from the custody of loyalist forces who viewed him with suspicion. The extraction itself was conducted by a team of Knights-Errant who had been specifically selected for their ability to operate in the psychically charged environment of post-battle Prospero. Rubio's initial resistance to recruitment reflected the complex loyalties that characterized many potential Knights-Errant candidates. Despite his disillusionment with Magnus the Red's increasingly reckless pursuit of forbidden knowledge, the codiceer retained deep emotional attachments to his surviving battle brothers and the traditions of his legion. The process of convincing him to accept service with the Knights-Errant required extended discussions about the nature of loyalty, duty, and the greater good. His eventual acceptance came only after he was presented with evidence of the full extent of chaos corruption within the traitor legions and the vital role that the Knights-Errant would play in combating these threats. The recruitment of Varon Titus presented different challenges that highlighted the diverse backgrounds and motivations of potential Knights-Errant candidates. Titus, a veteran sergeant of the Ultramarines, had demonstrated exceptional tactical flexibility and independent thinking during the early stages of the heresy. His ability to adapt to rapidly changing battlefield conditions and his willingness to question established doctrine when circumstances demanded it brought him to the attention of Malcador's recruitment networks. The extraction of Titus from active service with the Ultramarines required delicate negotiations with Robute Guilliman's command structure. The Primarch of the 13th Legion was known for his appreciation of administrative efficiency and his respect for proper channels of authority, but he was also pragmatic enough to recognize the value of specialized units operating under direct Imperial authority. The transfer was arranged through official channels, with Titus being reassigned to special duties that would allow him to serve the broader Imperial cause while maintaining his honor and standing within his original legion. The psychological profile that emerged from successful Knights-Errant candidates revealed several consistent characteristics that transcended their diverse origins. They invariably possessed high levels of personal integrity, demonstrated by their willingness to sacrifice personal advancement or comfort in service of their principles. They showed exceptional resilience in the face of trauma, able to process devastating losses or betrayals without becoming paralyzed by grief or consumed by desire for revenge. Most importantly, they displayed a capacity for growth and adaptation that allowed them to evolve beyond the limitations of their original training and conditioning. The diversity of recruitment sources reflected Malcador's understanding that the challenges facing the Imperium would require equally diverse solutions. While the majority of Knights-Errant came from the Astartes legions, the organization also included carefully selected individuals from the Imperial Army, the Mechanicum, and even civilian populations. These mortal members brought different perspectives and capabilities that complemented the superhuman abilities of their Astartes colleagues, creating a more versatile and effective organization. The screening process for mortal candidates was necessarily different from that applied to Astartes recruits, as baseline humans lacked the enhanced physiology and psychological conditioning that characterized the Emperor's gene-forged warriors. Instead, the emphasis was placed on identifying individuals who possessed exceptional mental discipline, demonstrated loyalty under extreme circumstances, and specialized skills that would be valuable for specific types of missions. These might include linguistic abilities for diplomatic work, technical expertise for sabotage operations, or psychic sensitivity for counterintelligence activities. The integration of mortal and Astartes personnel within the Knights-Errant created unique challenges that required careful management. The vast differences in physical capabilities, lifespans, and psychological conditioning between the two groups could easily lead to misunderstandings or conflicts if not properly addressed. The solution involved creating mixed teams where the strengths of each member complemented those of their colleagues, with command structures that emphasized competence and mission success over traditional hierarchies based on physical prowess or genetic enhancement. The ongoing recruitment efforts faced constant challenges from the deteriorating strategic situation across the galaxy. Communication networks were increasingly disrupted by warp storms and enemy action, making it difficult to maintain contact with potential candidates or coordinate extraction operations. The growing influence of chaos corruption within Imperial forces meant that recruitment operations themselves carried significant risks of exposure or infiltration by enemy agents seeking to compromise the organization from within. The development of counterintelligence procedures became an essential component of the recruitment process as the heresy progressed. Every potential candidate had to be thoroughly investigated, not just for their suitability for service as a Knight-Errant, but also for any signs of chaos corruption or enemy influence. This required the development of new techniques for detecting subtle forms of manipulation or coercion that might not be immediately apparent through conventional interrogation methods. The psychological support systems developed for new recruits reflected the unique stresses associated with service as a Knight-Errant. These individuals had to abandon their previous identities and allegiances, often cutting all ties with their former comrades and accepting that they might never again experience the brotherhood and mutual support that had defined their previous existence. The transition period was carefully managed to minimize the risk of psychological breakdown or rejection of their new role. The success rate of Knights-Errant recruitment remained relatively low throughout the heresy, with many promising candidates ultimately proving unsuitable for the unique demands of the organization. Some lacked the psychological flexibility required to operate outside traditional command structures, while others struggled with the moral ambiguity inherent in many of their missions. The high standards maintained by the recruitment process ensured that those who did successfully complete their training were exceptionally capable individuals, but it also meant that the organization remained relatively small compared to conventional Imperial military units. The legacy of the recruitment and selection procedures developed during the Horus Heresy would extend far beyond the immediate crisis, providing the foundation for future Imperial institutions dedicated to maintaining security and rooting out corruption. The techniques and criteria developed for identifying suitable Knights-Errant candidates would eventually be adapted and refined for use by organizations like the nascent Inquisition, ensuring that the lessons learned during this dark period would continue to serve the Imperium in the millennia to come. The transformation of Captain Nathaniel Garro from a line officer of the Death Guard into the first Knight-Errant represented more than a simple change of allegiance. It marked the birth of an entirely new kind of Imperial warrior. Garro's journey from the poisoned trenches of Barbaras to the hallowed halls beneath the Imperial Palace had been one of constant evolution, each trial stripping away another layer of his former identity until only the essential core remained. His weathered features, marked by decades of warfare and the recent trauma of witnessing his legion's corruption, bore the weight of impossible choices made in service of an ideal that transcended genetic bonds. The Death Guard captain's initial resistance to Malcador's proposal had been rooted in the fundamental nature of Astartes' conditioning. For decades, Garo had defined himself through his service to Mortarion and his brotherhood with the warriors of the 14th Legion. The concept of serving the Emperor directly, without the intermediary authority of his primarch, challenged every assumption upon which his identity had been built. Yet the corruption he had witnessed aboard the Eisenstein, the demonic incursions, the plague-touched madness of his former brothers, the casual embrace of powers that defied rational understanding, had already begun the process of severing those bonds. Garo's acceptance of his new role came gradually, through a series of conversations with the Sigillite that revealed the true scope of the threat facing humanity. The captain's practical nature, honed by years of siege warfare and attritional combat, allowed him to grasp the strategic implications of Horus's betrayal more quickly than many of his contemporaries. The traitor legions possessed intimate knowledge of loyalist doctrine, equipment, and personnel. Victory would require new approaches, new tactics, and new kinds of warriors capable of operating outside the established paradigms that the enemy understood so well. The physical transformation that accompanied Garo's elevation to Knight-Errant status was subtle but significant. His battle plate, once bearing the proud heraldry of the Death Guard, was refashioned with new iconography that spoke to his direct service to the throne. The winged skull that adorned his breastplate served as a reminder of his dual nature, both the angel of death that his Astartes conditioning had made him, and the servant of the Emperor's will that his new oath demanded. The removal of his legion's colors had been a painful process, each scrape of the armorer's tools feeling like the erasure of a cherished memory. The psychological adjustments required for Garo's new role proved more challenging than the physical modifications. The captain had spent his entire adult life as part of a clearly defined hierarchy, with established protocols governing every aspect of his existence. The Knights-Errant operated in a realm of moral ambiguity, where traditional codes of honor might conflict with mission requirements. Garo's first independent operations tested his ability to make decisions without the support structure of his former legion, forcing him to develop new frameworks for evaluating complex situations. The recruitment of Eacton crews presented Malcador with both an opportunity and a challenge that would define the future character of the Knights-Errant organization. The veteran battle captain of the Sons of Horus carried within his scarred frame the accumulated wisdom of 2 centuries of warfare, his graying hair and weathered features marking him as one of the few Astartes who had served since the earliest days of the Great Crusade. Yet it was precisely this experience that had made him increasingly irrelevant within his own legion, as Horus's inner circle embraced new philosophies and tactics that bore little resemblance to the ideals that had originally driven the conquest of the galaxy. Crew's nickname, the Half-Herd, reflected his marginalization within the 16th Legion's command structure. His adherence to older traditions of honor and his vocal criticism of the growing cult of personality surrounding the Warmaster had earned him the dismissive attention of his younger brothers. They viewed his concerns as the complaints of an aging warrior unable to adapt to changing times, failing to recognize that his perspective was shaped by direct experience with the Emperor's original vision for the Great Crusade. The battle captain's survival of the Istvan III virus bombing had been as much a matter of character as circumstance. While many of his contemporaries had been caught off guard by the sudden betrayal, Crew's suspicions about the Legion's direction had left him psychologically prepared for the unthinkable. His decision to join Garo aboard the Eisenstein had been made with the clear understanding that he was choosing principle over personal loyalty, the Emperor's vision over the Warmaster's ambitions. Crew's integration into the Knights-Errant brought unique challenges that reflected his complex relationship with his former legion. Unlike Garo, who had been forced to confront the obvious corruption of the Death Guard, Cruz faced the more subtle task of distinguishing between the Sons of Horus, who had genuinely embraced chaos, and those who had simply been swept along by events beyond their understanding. His intimate knowledge of the Legion's personnel, tactics, and internal dynamics made him invaluable for intelligence gathering and strategic planning, but it also created emotional burdens that his younger colleagues could barely comprehend. The veteran's approach to his new role reflected decades of hard-won experience in the realities of warfare. Wergaro brought the methodical precision of a siege specialist. Cruz contributed the adaptive flexibility of a warrior who had fought on 100 different worlds against countless varieties of enemies. His ability to assess rapidly changing situations and identify unconventional solutions proved invaluable during the early operations of the Knights-Errant, when the organization was still developing its operational doctrine and learning to function outside traditional imperial hierarchies. The recruitment of Tylos Rubio from the devastated ruins of Prospero represented one of the most significant early expansions of the Knights-Errant's capabilities. The Codicier's survival of the Space Wolves' assault on his homeworld had been a testament to both his psychic abilities and his tactical acumen, but it had also left him in a precarious position within the broader imperial hierarchy. The Council of Nicaea's prohibition on the use of psychic powers within the Astartes legions had made him a potential liability in the eyes of many loyalist commanders, despite his demonstrated loyalty to the Emperor's cause. Rubio's physical appearance bore the distinctive marks of his Prospero heritage, the olive complexion and aquiline features that characterized the population of the Thousand Suns homeworld. His psychic hood, a masterwork of Prosperine technology, had been modified to incorporate new protective measures developed in response to the growing threat of chaos corruption. The device's crystalline components caught and refracted light in patterns that seemed to shift and change depending on the observer's perspective, creating an unsettling effect that many found difficult to look upon directly. The Codicier's integration into the Knights-Errant required careful management of both his abilities and the suspicions they generated among his new colleagues. Many Imperial forces had developed an instinctive distrust of Psykers following the revelations about the nature of the warp and its inhabitants. Rubio's presence forced the organization to confront these prejudices while developing new protocols for the safe and effective use of psychic abilities in combat operations. The challenges of incorporating a Psyker into the Knights-Errant extended beyond simple matters of operational security. Rubio's abilities made him invaluable for certain types of missions. He could detect chaos corruption, communicate across vast distances, and perceive threats that remained invisible to conventional senses. Yet these same abilities also made him a potential target for the very forces the organization was dedicated to combating. The constant vigilance required to maintain his psychic defenses created additional stress that had to be carefully monitored and managed. Rubio's perspective on the Emperor's nature proved particularly valuable as the Knights-Errant began to grapple with the theological implications of their service. His psychic sensitivity allowed him to perceive aspects of the Master of Mankind that remained hidden from ordinary humans, providing insights into the true nature of the struggle against chaos. These revelations helped shape the organization's understanding of their mission and the importance of maintaining absolute loyalty to the Emperor's will, regardless of the personal cost. The recruitment of Varan Titus presented different challenges that highlighted the diverse backgrounds and motivations of the Knights-Errant's membership. The World Eater's sergeant had distinguished himself during the early stages of the heresy through his ability to overcome the psychological conditioning imposed by the Butcher's nails, the crude neural implants that drove his legion to ever greater heights of violence. His success in maintaining tactical coherence, despite the constant pressure of the devices, marked him as an exceptional individual, even among the superhuman warriors of the Astartes. Titus's physical appearance reflected the brutal nature of his legion's warfare. His scarred features bore the marks of countless close-quarters engagements, while his armor showed the distinctive wear patterns of a warrior who preferred to engage his enemies at point-blank range. The Butcher's nails themselves were visible as metallic protrusions at the base of his skull, their crude construction a stark contrast to the sophisticated augmentations employed by other legions. The constant pain generated by the devices had etched permanent lines of strain around his eyes, creating an expression of perpetual intensity that many found unsettling. The sergeant's struggle with the nails provided him with unique insights into the nature of chaos corruption and the ways in which it could subvert even the strongest will. His experience with resisting the device's influence had taught him techniques for maintaining mental clarity under extreme stress, skills that proved invaluable during operations against chaos-corrupted forces. The constant battle against his own implants had also developed his capacity for self-discipline and mental fortitude to extraordinary levels. Titus's integration into the Knights-Errant required the development of new support systems designed to help him manage the ongoing effects of the Butcher's nails. The organization's Medicae specialists worked closely with Mechanicum adepts to develop treatments that could mitigate the device's influence without completely removing them, a process that would likely prove fatal given their integration with his nervous system. These efforts represented some of the earliest attempts to reverse the effects of chaos corruption, providing valuable experience that would inform future operations. The World Eater's sergeant's tactical contributions to the Knights-Errant reflected his legion's specialization in close-quarters combat and assault operations. His expertise in boarding actions, urban warfare, and other forms of confined space combat proved invaluable during missions that required rapid, decisive action. His ability to maintain tactical coherence despite the nail's influence also made him an effective leader for operations involving other warriors who might be struggling with various forms of psychological pressure or corruption. The psychological profiles of these first Knights-Errant revealed common characteristics that transcended their diverse origins and backgrounds. Each had demonstrated the ability to question established authority when circumstances demanded it, showing a capacity for independent thought that set them apart from their more conventional brothers. They had all experienced profound loss or betrayal that had forced them to reevaluate their fundamental assumptions about loyalty, duty, and purpose. Most importantly, they had shown the resilience necessary to rebuild their identities around new principles without losing their essential humanity. The operational doctrine that emerged from the experiences of these first Knights-Errant emphasized flexibility and adaptability over rigid adherence to established protocols. Their missions often required them to operate in situations where conventional military wisdom proved inadequate, forcing them to develop new approaches to familiar problems. The diversity of their backgrounds and specializations created a synergistic effect that allowed the organization to tackle challenges that would have overwhelmed more homogeneous units. The command structure that developed around these founding members reflected the unique nature of their service. While Malcador maintained overall authority over the organization, the Knights-Errant themselves were given considerable latitude in how they accomplished their missions. This decentralized approach allowed them to respond rapidly to changing circumstances while maintaining the operational security that was essential to their effectiveness. The training regimen developed for new Knights-Errant drew heavily on the experiences and expertise of these founding members. Each brought specialized knowledge and techniques that were incorporated into the organization's evolving doctrine. Garo's expertise in siege warfare, Crew's understanding of fleet operations, Rubio's psychic abilities, and Titus's close-quarters combat skills all contributed to a comprehensive curriculum that prepared new recruits for the diverse challenges they would face. The psychological support systems that emerged from the early Knights-Errant operations reflected the unique stresses associated with their service. These warriors had to function effectively while cut off from the traditional support structures that had previously defined their existence. The bonds they formed with their fellow Knights-Errant became crucial for maintaining their mental health and operational effectiveness, creating a new form of brotherhood that transcended the genetic loyalties of their original legions. The intelligence networks that developed around the Knights-Errant drew on the diverse contacts and connections of their membership. Each brought knowledge of different imperial institutions, military units, and political factions that could be leveraged for operational purposes. This collective intelligence proved invaluable for planning missions and assessing the reliability of potential allies or the threat posed by suspected enemies. The equipment and resources allocated to the Knights-Errant reflected their special status within the imperial hierarchy. They had access to advanced weapons and technologies that were not available to conventional forces, including specialized gear designed to counter chaos corruption and psychic threats. The maintenance and distribution of this equipment required the development of new logistical systems that could operate independently of traditional imperial supply chains. The expansion of the Knights-Errant beyond its founding members brought new challenges and opportunities that tested the organization's adaptability and core principles. As the Horus Heresy deepened and the galaxy burned with the fires of civil war, Malcador's agents cast their nets wider, seeking individuals whose unique circumstances and demonstrated loyalty made them suitable for service in this most exclusive of imperial institutions. The recruitment of these second-generation Knights-Errant would fundamentally alter the organization's character, introducing new perspectives and capabilities while forcing its leadership to confront questions about identity, purpose, and the nature of service to the Emperor. The devastation at Istvan V had left the galaxy littered with the broken remnants of 3 loyal legions, their survivors scattered across hostile territory with little hope of conventional rescue. Among these desperate warriors, Malcador's recruitment networks identified individuals whose responses to catastrophic loss revealed the psychological resilience and moral clarity that characterized successful Knights-Errant candidates. The process of extracting these individuals from behind enemy lines required unprecedented coordination between various imperial agencies and demonstrated the growing influence of the organization within the broader war effort. Tubal Cain of the Iron Hands represented one of the most significant early recruits from the Istvan V survivors. The Tech Marine's survival of the drop site massacre had been a testament to both his tactical acumen and his intimate understanding of the technological systems that kept Astartes' forces operational under extreme conditions. His augmented form bore the distinctive modifications favored by the 10th Legion, with extensive cybernetic replacements that had been necessitated by decades of warfare and the recent trauma of watching his primarch fall to Fulgrim's blade. The neural implants that interfaced with Cain's power armor created a constant stream of tactical data, their soft blue glow visible through the transparent aluminum viewing ports installed in his skull. His left arm had been replaced entirely with a sophisticated mechanical prosthetic that incorporated multiple tool attachments and weapon systems, while his right eye had been augmented with a multi-spectrum sensor array that could detect everything from heat signatures to electromagnetic emissions. The combination of flesh and machine that defined his existence reflected the Iron Hand's philosophy of improvement through technological enhancement, but it also created unique vulnerabilities that his enemies might exploit. Cain's recruitment had been complicated by his obsession with avenging his fallen primarch and the betrayal of the Emperor's children. The Tech Marine's analytical mind had processed the events of Istvan V with mechanical precision, identifying the tactical errors and strategic miscalculations that had led to the massacre. His desire for revenge threatened to consume him, creating a psychological instability that could compromise his effectiveness as a knight-errant. The process of channeling his rage into productive service required careful management and the development of new therapeutic techniques designed to help traumatized warriors process their experiences without losing their operational effectiveness. The integration of Cain into the Knights-Errant brought valuable technical expertise that expanded the organization's capabilities significantly. His knowledge of advanced weapon systems, vehicle maintenance, and battlefield engineering proved invaluable during operations that required specialized equipment or technical solutions to complex problems. The Tech Marine's ability to interface directly with machine spirits and cogitator systems also provided new opportunities for intelligence gathering and sabotage operations against enemy forces. The psychological profile that emerged from Cain's evaluation revealed the complex relationship between his human consciousness and his mechanical augmentations. The Iron Hand's philosophy of flesh being weak had led him to embrace cybernetic enhancement as a means of achieving perfection, but the trauma of Istvan V had forced him to confront the limitations of purely technological solutions. His service as a knight-errant would require him to develop new approaches to problem-solving that incorporated both his technical expertise and his recovering humanity. The recruitment of Severian the Wolf from the remnants of the Sons of Horus presented different challenges that highlighted the complex loyalties and motivations that characterized many second-generation Knights-Errant candidates. The veteran warrior had served with distinction during the Great Crusade, his scarred features and graying hair marking him as one of the few Astartes who had witnessed the transformation of the 16th Legion from the Luna Wolves into the Sons of Horus. His survival of the purges that had eliminated most loyalist elements within the Legion had been a matter of both luck and careful political maneuvering. Severian's physical appearance reflected decades of warfare across countless worlds, his battle plate bearing the scars of engagements that had tested the limits of even Astartes' endurance. The wolf's head pendant that hung from his neck served as a reminder of his legion's original identity, while the carefully maintained weapons and equipment he carried spoke to his professional competence and attention to detail. His pale blue eyes held the 1,000-yard stare of a veteran who had seen too much death and betrayal, yet retained enough humanity to feel the weight of his experiences. The veteran's approach to his new role as a knight-errant differed significantly from that of his colleague Eacton Cruz, despite their shared origins within the 16th Legion. Where Cruz had embraced his marginalization as validation of his adherence to older traditions, Severian had actively worked to maintain his position within the Legion's hierarchy, while secretly documenting the growing corruption among his brothers. His intelligence networks and carefully cultivated contacts within the Sons of Horus provided valuable insights into the Traitor Legion's organization and capabilities. The psychological challenges facing Severian reflected the unique nature of his service within a legion that had gradually embraced chaos corruption. Unlike warriors who had experienced sudden betrayal, he had been forced to watch his brothers slowly succumb to influences that he recognized as fundamentally evil. The constant vigilance required to maintain his cover, while gathering intelligence, had created a state of perpetual stress that threatened to undermine his mental stability. His recruitment by the Knights-Errant provided an opportunity to finally serve openly in accordance with his principles, but it also required him to process years of accumulated trauma and guilt. The integration of Severian into the Knights-Errant brought valuable intelligence capabilities that complemented the organization's existing strengths. His understanding of Sons of Horus tactics, personnel, and internal dynamics proved invaluable for planning operations against the Traitor Legion. The veteran's experience with covert operations and intelligence gathering also provided new techniques and approaches that could be applied to missions involving other enemy forces. The recruitment of Amendora Kendall represented a revolutionary expansion of the Knights-Errant beyond the ranks of the Astartes, introducing the first mortal human to serve in the organization's elite ranks. Kendall's background as a member of the Silent Sisterhood had provided her with unique qualifications that made her invaluable for operations against psychers and chaos-corrupted forces. Her null field abilities could neutralize psychic threats that might overwhelm even the most skilled Astartes, while her training in stealth and assassination techniques offered capabilities that complemented the more direct approaches favored by her superhuman colleagues. Kendall's physical appearance reflected the austere traditions of the Silent Sisterhood, her pale complexion and shaven head marking her as a member of that secretive organization. The body glove she wore beneath her armor incorporated advanced stealth systems that could render her nearly invisible to most forms of detection, while her weapons were crafted from materials that remained stable even in the presence of strong psychic emanations. The null field generator that she carried created a zone of psychic dead space around her, its effects noticeable to sensitive individuals as a feeling of unease or disorientation. The integration of a mortal human into the Knights-Errant required significant adjustments to the organization's operational doctrine and support systems. Kendall's baseline human physiology meant that she could not survive the same level of punishment that her Astartes colleagues could endure, requiring new tactical approaches that maximized her unique abilities while minimizing her exposure to direct combat. The development of specialized equipment and support protocols for mortal Knights-Errant would establish precedents that would prove valuable as the organization continued to expand beyond its original Astartes membership. The psychological profile that emerged from Kendall's evaluation revealed the unique challenges facing mortal humans who served alongside superhuman warriors. Her training with the Silent Sisterhood had prepared her for the isolation and psychological pressure associated with her null abilities, but working directly with Astartes required new forms of mental conditioning. The vast differences in lifespan, physical capabilities, and cognitive processing between humans and Astartes created communication barriers that had to be carefully managed to maintain operational effectiveness. The recruitment of these second-generation Knights-Errant forced the organization to confront fundamental questions about its identity and purpose. The original conception of the Knights-Errant as elite Astartes warriors serving directly under the Emperor's authority had been expanded to include individuals from diverse backgrounds and organizations. This evolution reflected the growing recognition that the challenges facing the Imperium required equally diverse solutions, but it also created new complexities in terms of command structure, training protocols, and operational doctrine. The integration challenges facing the expanding Knights-Errant organization were multifaceted and required innovative solutions. The diverse backgrounds of new recruits meant that traditional Astartes training methods were often inadequate for preparing them for their new roles. Mortals like Kendall required different forms of physical conditioning and equipment, while warriors from different legions brought varying tactical doctrines and cultural perspectives that had to be reconciled with the organization's evolving mission parameters. The command structure that emerged from these integration challenges reflected the pragmatic approach that characterized the Knights-Errant's development. Rather than imposing a rigid hierarchy based on traditional imperial precedents, the organization adopted a flexible system that emphasized competence and mission effectiveness over formal rank or origin. This approach allowed individuals like Kendall to contribute their unique capabilities without being constrained by the limitations that might have been imposed by more conventional military structures. The training regimen developed for second-generation Knights-Errant incorporated lessons learned from the experiences of the founding members while adapting to the diverse needs of new recruits. The curriculum emphasized psychological resilience, independent decision-making, and the ability to operate effectively in isolation or as part of small teams. Specialized modules were developed to address the unique challenges facing different types of personnel, from the technical requirements of techmarines like Kane to the psychic defenses needed by individuals working alongside null field generators. The operational doctrine that evolved from the integration of these diverse personnel reflected the organization's growing sophistication and capability. Mixed teams that combined the strengths of different types of personnel proved particularly effective for complex missions that required multiple skill sets. The combination of Astartes' combat capabilities, mortal human infiltration skills, and specialized technical or psychic abilities created synergistic effects that allowed the Knights-Errant to tackle challenges that would have been impossible for more homogeneous units. The psychological support systems developed for second-generation Knights-Errant reflected the unique stresses associated with their diverse backgrounds and experiences. Veterans like Kane and Severian required specialized treatment for trauma-related conditions, while individuals like Kendall needed support for the challenges of working alongside superhuman colleagues. The development of these support systems represented some of the earliest attempts to address the mental health needs of Imperial personnel operating under extreme stress, providing valuable experience that would inform future military medical practices. The intelligence networks that developed around the second-generation Knights-Errant reflected their diverse origins and connections. Each new recruit brought knowledge of different Imperial institutions, enemy organizations, and potential allies that could be leveraged for operational purposes. The combination of technical expertise, covert operations experience, and specialized knowledge created a comprehensive intelligence capability that proved invaluable for planning and executing complex missions. The equipment and resources allocated to accommodate the diverse needs of second-generation Knights-Errant required significant innovations in logistics and supply management. The organization's quartermasters had to develop new systems for maintaining and distributing specialized equipment for different types of personnel, from advanced cybernetic components for tech marines to stealth gear for infiltration specialists. The complexity of these requirements forced the development of new relationships with various imperial institutions and manufacturing facilities. The evolving organizational structure of the Knights-Errant reflected the challenges of managing an increasingly diverse and specialized force. The original informal command structure that had worked well for the founding members proved inadequate for coordinating the activities of larger numbers of personnel with varying capabilities and requirements. New administrative systems were developed to track personnel assignments, equipment distribution, and mission planning while maintaining the operational security that was essential to the organization's effectiveness. The recruitment criteria that emerged from the experiences with second-generation Knights-Errant reflected the organization's growing understanding of the qualities that made individuals successful in their unique role. Physical capabilities remained important, but psychological resilience, moral clarity, and the ability to adapt to changing circumstances proved to be more reliable predictors of success. The diversity of successful recruits also demonstrated that the organization's value lay not in any single type of warrior, but in the combination of different perspectives and capabilities that could be brought to bear on complex problems. The operational deployment of the Knights-Errant marked a fundamental shift in how the Imperium conducted warfare during the Horus Heresy. While massive fleets and legion strength forces engaged in the grand campaigns that would determine the fate of the galaxy, these elite operatives pursued objectives that conventional military doctrine could not address. Their missions required a delicate balance of stealth, precision, and adaptability that distinguished them from both the overwhelming force of the Astartes legions and the specialized lethality of the Officio Assassinorum. The intelligence-gathering operations conducted by the Knights-Errant exploited their unique position within the imperial hierarchy to access information that remained beyond the reach of traditional reconnaissance assets. Their ability to operate independently of established command structures allowed them to pursue leads and investigate suspicions that might have been dismissed or suppressed by more conventional forces. The diverse backgrounds of the organization's membership provided access to different intelligence networks and sources of information that could be cross-referenced and verified to build comprehensive assessments of enemy capabilities and intentions. Nathaniel Garrow's infiltration of the Somnus Citadel exemplified the kind of covert operation that only the Knights-Errant could successfully undertake. The fortress monastery had been corrupted by word-bearers' influence. Its defenders gradually turned against the Emperor through a combination of theological manipulation and psychic conditioning. Conventional assault forces would have faced a prolonged siege against fortifications that had been designed to withstand the heaviest weapons available to Imperial forces. The political ramifications of attacking what appeared to be a loyal Imperial installation would have created additional complications that could have compromised the broader war effort. Garrow's approach to the mission demonstrated the tactical flexibility that characterized Knights-Errant operations. Rather than attempting a direct assault, he infiltrated the citadel by exploiting the confusion surrounding refugee movements in the sector. His modified Death Guard armor had been repainted in the colors of a minor Imperial Army regiment, while forged documentation identified him as a liaison officer coordinating evacuation efforts. The deception required intimate knowledge of Imperial bureaucratic procedures and the ability to maintain his cover while under constant scrutiny from potentially hostile forces. The intelligence gathered during Garrow's infiltration revealed the sophisticated nature of chaos corruption within supposedly loyal Imperial institutions. The word-bearers had not simply conquered the citadel through military force. They had systematically undermined the faith and loyalty of its defenders through carefully orchestrated theological discussions and the gradual introduction of corrupted religious practices. The process had taken months to complete, with each stage designed to appear as a natural evolution of existing imperial doctrine rather than a fundamental betrayal of the Emperor's vision. The sabotage operations conducted by the Knights-Errant required a level of technical expertise and operational security that exceeded the capabilities of most imperial forces. Tubal Cain's destruction of the Forge complex on Corvani's Prime demonstrated how the organization's diverse membership could be leveraged to achieve objectives that would have been impossible for more homogeneous units. The Iron Hand's Tech Marine's understanding of manufacturing processes and machine spirits allowed him to identify critical vulnerabilities in the facility's production systems that could be exploited to maximize the impact of his sabotage efforts. The Corvani's Forge complex had been captured by Death Guard forces during the early stages of the heresy, its production capabilities redirected toward manufacturing specialized ammunition and equipment for the traitor legions. The facility's defensive systems had been upgraded with sophisticated detection grids and automated weapon systems that made conventional assault extremely hazardous. The presence of Nurgle-corrupted tech marines among the facility's staff created additional challenges, as their intimate knowledge of Imperial technology allowed them to implement countermeasures against standard sabotage techniques. Cain's infiltration of the complex required him to suppress his natural revulsion at the corruption he encountered while maintaining the facade of a loyal servant of the Dark Mechanicum. The sight of sacred machinery defiled with chaos symbols and the sound of machine spirits crying out in torment tested his psychological resilience to its limits. His augmented senses detected the presence of demonic entities bound into the facility's cogitator systems, their malevolent influence spreading through the data networks like a technological plague. The sabotage operation itself demonstrated the precision and planning that characterized Knights-Errant missions. Rather than simply destroying the facility through explosive charges, Cain introduced subtle modifications to the manufacturing processes that would cause catastrophic failures in the equipment being produced. The contaminated ammunition would explode prematurely in the weapons of traitor forces, while the corrupted armor plates would fail under stress at critical moments. The delayed nature of these failures would maximize their psychological impact while making it difficult for enemy forces to identify the source of their problems. The hunt for high-value targets represented one of the most dangerous and psychologically demanding aspects of Knights-Errant operations. These missions required the operatives to confront former comrades who had embraced chaos corruption, forcing them to overcome personal attachments and emotional bonds in service of their duty to the Emperor. The psychological preparation required for such operations went beyond conventional military training, incorporating techniques designed to help the operatives maintain their mental stability while engaging in what amounted to fratricide on a galactic scale. Severian the Wolf's pursuit of Captain Tormageddon of the Sons of Horus illustrated the complex challenges associated with eliminating high-value targets within the traitor legions. Tormageddon had been a respected officer during the Great Crusade, his tactical acumen and leadership abilities earning him the admiration of his peers across multiple legions. His corruption by chaos had been gradual and subtle, making it difficult to determine exactly when he had crossed the line from loyal Imperial servant to active traitor. The intelligence gathered on Tormageddon's activities revealed the sophisticated nature of chaos corruption within the traitor legions. Rather than simply embracing the obvious manifestations of chaos worship, he had maintained the outward appearance of loyalty while systematically undermining Imperial operations through carefully orchestrated betrayals and strategic failures. His ability to operate within loyalist command structures while serving the interests of the War Master made him an extremely dangerous enemy who could not be countered through conventional military means. Severian's approach to the elimination required extensive preparation and careful timing to maximize the chances of success while minimizing the risk of exposure. The veteran's knowledge of Sons of Horus operational patterns allowed him to predict Tormageddon's movements and identify opportunities for engagement. The psychological burden of hunting a former brother weighed heavily on Severian, requiring him to draw upon reserves of mental strength that had been developed through years of covert operations within his corrupted legion. The actual elimination took place during a fleet engagement in the Calth system, where Tormageddon's strike cruiser had been separated from the main sons of Horus formation during a tactical maneuver. Severian's infiltration of the vessel required him to overcome multiple layers of security while avoiding detection by the ship's corrupted crew. The close-quarters combat that ensued when his presence was discovered tested his abilities against opponents who knew his fighting style and tactical preferences intimately. The protection of Imperial assets during the heresy required the Knights-Errant to operate as both guardians and evacuators, safeguarding personnel and resources that were vital to the Imperium's survival. These missions often involved working with civilian populations who had little understanding of the true nature of the threat they faced, requiring the operatives to maintain their cover while providing effective protection against enemies who might not reveal their true nature until it was too late to respond effectively. Amendra Kendall's evacuation of the Scholastica Psychana facility on Prospero demonstrated the unique challenges associated with protecting Imperial assets from chaos corruption. The facility housed hundreds of young psychers who were undergoing training and evaluation for potential service with the Imperial military. The presence of so many untrained psychic individuals created a beacon that attracted demonic entities and chaos cultists, making conventional defensive measures inadequate for ensuring their safety. The facility's location on Prospero, in the aftermath of the Space Wolves' assault on the Thousand Suns, created additional complications that required careful navigation. The planet's psychic environment had been destabilized by the massive expenditure of warp energy during the battle, creating unpredictable phenomena that could interfere with communication systems and transportation networks. The presence of Thousand Suns survivors, some of whom had been corrupted by their exposure to chaos sorcery, added another layer of threat that conventional Imperial forces were ill-equipped to handle. Kendall's null field abilities proved invaluable for protecting the young psychers from the psychic predators that stalked the ruined world. Her presence created a zone of psychic dead space that prevented demonic entities from manifesting, while also suppressing the uncontrolled psychic emanations that might have attracted additional threats. The psychological effect of her abilities on the young psychers required careful management, as her null field generated feelings of unease and disorientation that could exacerbate their already fragile mental states. The evacuation operation required coordination with multiple Imperial agencies, including the Scholastica Psychana's own security forces and elements of the Imperial Navy that could provide transportation off-world. The complexity of these arrangements tested the Knights-Errant's ability to work within existing Imperial hierarchies while maintaining their operational independence. The success of the mission depended on careful timing and the ability to adapt to changing circumstances as the situation on Prospero continued to deteriorate. The collaboration between the Knights-Errant and the Legio Custodes represented one of the most significant expansions of the organization's operational capabilities. The Emperor's golden armored guardians possessed unparalleled combat abilities and absolute loyalty to the throne, but their rigid adherence to protocol and their focus on personal protection of the Emperor sometimes limited their effectiveness in situations that required flexibility and independent action. The partnership between these two elite organizations created synergistic effects that enhanced the capabilities of both groups. The joint operation to secure the Vault of Morevec demonstrated how the complementary strengths of the Knights-Errant and Custodes could be combined to achieve objectives that neither organization could have accomplished alone. The vault contained archaeotech devices and ancient knowledge that could potentially be used to enhance the Imperium's military capabilities, but its location within a zone of heavy warp interference made conventional assault extremely hazardous. The presence of Word-Bearer's forces in the area added another layer of complexity that required careful planning and coordination. The The Custodes contingent provided unmatched combat effectiveness and their intimate knowledge of ancient imperial security protocols, while the Knights-Errant contributed their expertise in covert operations and their ability to adapt to unexpected situations. The combination of these capabilities allowed the joint force to overcome the vault's defenses and secure its contents before enemy forces could respond effectively. The operation also established precedents for future collaboration between the two organizations that would prove valuable as the heresy progressed. The partnership with the Sisters of Silence created additional opportunities for the Knights-Errant to expand their operational capabilities against psychic threats. The Silent Sisterhood's null field abilities and their specialized training in combating psykers complemented the Knights-Errant's more conventional military skills, creating teams that could operate effectively against chaos sorcerers and demonic entities. The integration of these capabilities required the development of new tactical doctrines and communication protocols that could accommodate the unique requirements of both organizations. The assault on the Crimson Apostles' stronghold on Genna Prime exemplified the effectiveness of combined Knights-Errant and Sisters of Silence operations. The Word-Bearer's sorcerer had established a fortress temple that served as a focal point for demonic summoning rituals, its psychic emanations creating a zone of warp instability that threatened to engulf the entire system. Conventional Imperial forces had been unable to approach the stronghold due to the intense psychic interference, while orbital bombardment had proven ineffective against the supernatural defenses protecting the facility. The combined assault force utilized the Sisters of Silence's null field generators to create corridors of psychic dead space that allowed the Knights-Errant to advance through the stronghold's outer defenses. The coordination required between the two organizations tested their ability to work together under extreme stress, as the slightest breakdown in communication could have resulted in catastrophic failure. The successful completion of the mission demonstrated the potential for expanded cooperation between Imperial organizations that had previously operated in isolation. The intelligence networks developed by the Knights-Errant during their operations created a comprehensive picture of chaos corruption within the Imperium that would have been impossible to achieve through conventional reconnaissance methods. The organization's operatives were uniquely positioned to identify subtle signs of corruption and infiltration that might have been overlooked by more traditional intelligence assets. Their reports provided Malcador and the Loyalist High Command with crucial information about enemy capabilities, intentions, and vulnerabilities that could be exploited in future operations. The operational security measures developed to protect these intelligence networks reflected the sophisticated nature of the threats facing the Imperium. The Knights-Errant employed multiple layers of encryption and authentication to ensure that their communications could not be intercepted or corrupted by enemy forces. The use of psychic dead zones and null field generators provided additional protection against chaos sorcery and demonic interference that might have compromised more conventional security measures. The logistical support required for Knights-Errant operations demanded the development of new supply chains and resource allocation systems that could operate independently of conventional Imperial military structures. The organization's operatives required specialized equipment and resources that were not available through standard military channels, necessitating the establishment of direct relationships with various Imperial institutions and manufacturing facilities. The complexity of these arrangements reflected the unique nature of the Knights-Errant's mission and their position within the broader Imperial hierarchy. The psychological support systems developed for Knights-Errant operatives reflected the unique stresses associated with their missions. The constant exposure to chaos corruption, the need to eliminate former comrades, and the isolation inherent in covert operations created mental health challenges that required specialized treatment and support. The organization's medical personnel developed new therapeutic techniques and support protocols that would later be adopted by other Imperial military units facing similar challenges. The frigate Eisenstein held a significance that transcended its modest tonnage and unremarkable specifications. Among the countless vessels that comprised the Imperial Navy's vast fleets, few could claim to have altered the course of galactic history through a single desperate voyage. The ship's hull bore the scars of its harrowing journey through the warp, where demonic entities had torn through its corridors, and the very fabric of reality had been tested against the determination of those who served aboard her. These physical marks served as constant reminders of the vessel's unique role in bringing word of Horus's betrayal to Terra, transforming it from a simple warship into a symbol of loyalty triumphant over impossible odds. The Eisenstein's transformation into the operational headquarters for the Knights-Errant required extensive modifications that reflected the organization's unique requirements. The ship's original configuration as a Death Guard frigate had emphasized durability and self-sufficiency, characteristics that made it well-suited for extended independent operations. The vessel's robust construction and redundant systems provided the reliability necessary for missions that might take the Knights-Errant far from Imperial supply lines and support networks. The Mechanicum adepts assigned to oversee the modifications approached their task with the reverence due to a vessel that had proven its worth in the Emperor's service. The most significant structural changes involved the conversion of the ship's primary troop compartments into specialized facilities designed to support the diverse needs of the Knights-Errant membership. The standard Astartes barracks were reconfigured to accommodate personnel from different legions and organizations, with individual chambers that could be customized to meet specific requirements. The armory was expanded and reorganized to house the eclectic collection of weapons and equipment that the organization's operatives required for their varied missions. Advanced security systems were installed throughout the ship to protect sensitive information and prevent unauthorized access to classified materials. The Eisenstein's command deck underwent comprehensive reconstruction to serve as the nerve center for Knights-Errant operations across the galaxy. The original tactical displays were replaced with advanced cogitator systems capable of processing intelligence from multiple sources simultaneously. Secure communication arrays were installed to maintain contact with operatives in the field while preventing enemy interception of sensitive transmissions. The navigation systems were upgraded with the latest astropathic guidance equipment, allowing the ship to plot courses through the increasingly unstable warp conditions that characterized the Heresy period. The ship's medical facilities were extensively modified to address the unique challenges associated with treating Knights-Errant personnel. The standard Astartes Apothecarian was expanded to include specialized equipment for treating various forms of chaos corruption and psychic trauma. Isolation chambers were constructed to contain individuals who might have been exposed to demonic influence during their missions. The medical staff assigned to the vessel included specialists in xenobiology, psychic phenomena, and the treatment of combat-related psychological disorders. The Eisenstein's role as a mobile recruitment center required the installation of sophisticated evaluation facilities that could assess potential candidates while maintaining operational security. Secure interrogation chambers were constructed with advanced psychic shielding to prevent external interference during the assessment process. Training facilities were established to provide initial conditioning for new recruits before they were transferred to more permanent installations. The ship's data banks were expanded to store comprehensive personnel files and psychological profiles for all Knights-Errant operatives. The vessel's hangar bays were reconfigured to accommodate the diverse transportation needs of the organization's personnel. Standard Imperial Navy shuttles were supplemented with specialized craft designed for covert insertion and extraction operations. Stealth-capable vessels equipped with advanced sensor dampening systems allowed Knights-Errant operatives to approach their targets without detection. The maintenance facilities were upgraded to service the wide variety of equipment and vehicles that the organization employed in its operations. The Eisenstein's quarters for senior personnel reflected the ship's new status as the headquarters of an elite Imperial organization. Nathaniel Garrow's cabin, located near the command deck, served as both personal quarters and a secondary command center from which he could coordinate operations when the ship's primary facilities were unavailable. The chamber's walls displayed the heraldry of the Knights-Errant alongside reminders of Garo's service with the Death Guard, creating a visual representation of his transformation from Legion captain to servant of the Emperor's will. The ship's chapel underwent complete reconstruction to serve the spiritual needs of personnel from diverse backgrounds and traditions. The original Death Guard iconography was replaced with symbols that emphasized direct service to the Emperor rather than loyalty to any particular primarch or legion. The chamber's design incorporated elements from various imperial traditions, creating a space that could accommodate the religious practices of Astartes from different legions, as well as mortal personnel from the broader imperial hierarchy. The Eisenstein's Intelligence Processing Center represented one of the most sophisticated installations of its kind within the Imperial Navy. The facility's cogitator systems could analyze vast amounts of data from multiple sources, identifying patterns and connections that might escape human observation. Secure communication links connected the center to intelligence networks across the galaxy, allowing Knights-Errant operatives to access real-time information about enemy movements and Imperial force dispositions. The staff assigned to the facility included specialists in cryptography, strategic analysis, and the interpretation of psychic phenomena. The ship's armory reflected the diverse operational requirements of the Knights-Errant organization. Standard Astartes weapons were supplemented with specialized equipment designed to counter specific threats. Null field generators provided protection against psychic attacks, while blessed weapons offered enhanced effectiveness against demonic entities. The armory's staff included techmarines from various legions who could maintain and modify equipment to meet the specific needs of individual operatives. The Eisenstein's training facilities were designed to prepare Knights-Errant operatives for the unique challenges they would face in the field. Combat simulators provided realistic training scenarios that incorporated the latest intelligence about enemy tactics and capabilities. Psychological conditioning chambers helped personnel develop the mental resilience necessary to resist chaos corruption and maintain their sanity when confronted with supernatural horrors. The training staff included veterans from multiple imperial organizations who could provide instruction in diverse combat techniques and operational procedures. The vessel's communications array represented a critical component of the Knights-Errant's operational capabilities. The system's advanced encryption protocols ensured that sensitive information could be transmitted without risk of interception by enemy forces. Astropathic relay stations allowed the ship to maintain contact with operatives across vast distances, while emergency beacons provided a means of summoning assistance when conventional communication methods failed. The communications staff included specially trained astropaths who had been conditioned to resist the psychic interference that characterized warp travel during the Heresy. The Eisenstein's role in recruitment operations required the ship to maintain a carefully balanced public profile that would not reveal its true purpose to potential enemies. The vessel's official designation and mission parameters were classified at the highest levels of imperial authority, with cover stories prepared to explain its presence in various sectors. The ship's crew included personnel from multiple imperial organizations who could provide credible explanations for its activities when questioned by other imperial forces. The psychological impact of serving aboard the Eisenstein extended beyond its practical modifications and operational capabilities. The ship's crew understood that they were part of something greater than a simple military organization. They were custodians of a vessel that had played a crucial role in humanity's struggle against the forces of chaos. This awareness created a sense of purpose and dedication that permeated every aspect of the ship's operations, from routine maintenance procedures to complex combat missions. The Eisenstein's navigation systems were upgraded to handle the increasingly dangerous conditions that characterized warp travel during the Heresy. The ship's navigators were specially selected for their ability to perceive and avoid the psychic storms and demonic incursions that plagued the Immaterium. Emergency protocols were established to deal with potential warp breaches or demonic manifestations that that might occur during transit. The ship's Geller field generators were reinforced and equipped with backup systems to ensure continuous protection against the horrors of the warp. The vessel's supply systems were modified to support extended independent operations in hostile territory. The ship's storage compartments were expanded to accommodate the diverse equipment and resources required by Knights-Errant operatives. Specialized manufacturing facilities were installed to produce ammunition, spare parts, and other consumables that might not be available through conventional Imperial supply chains. The ship's quartermaster staff included personnel with expertise in procurement, logistics, and resource management. The Eisenstein's defensive systems were upgraded to reflect its new role as a high-value target for enemy forces. The ship's void shields were reinforced with additional generators and backup systems to ensure continuous protection during combat operations. Point defense weapons were installed to counter boarding attempts and small craft attacks. The ship's armor was enhanced with additional plating and structural reinforcements to improve its survivability in hostile environments. The vessel's crew quarters were redesigned to accommodate the diverse needs of personnel from different Imperial organizations. Standard Imperial Navy accommodations were supplemented with specialized facilities for Astartes personnel, Sisters of Silence operatives, and other specialized personnel. The ship's recreational facilities were expanded to provide stress relief and social interaction opportunities for crew members who might spend extended periods in isolation or high-stress environments. The Eisenstein's maintenance facilities were upgraded to service the wide variety of equipment and systems that the Knights-Errant employed in their operations. The ship's techmarines and technical staff received specialized training in the maintenance and repair of equipment from multiple Imperial organizations. Advanced diagnostic systems were installed to identify potential problems before they could compromise operational effectiveness. The ship's machine shops were equipped with the tools and materials necessary to fabricate replacement parts and modify existing equipment as mission requirements changed. The symbolic importance of the Eisenstein extended beyond its practical role as a mobile headquarters and recruitment center. The ship represented the triumph of loyalty over corruption, the victory of principle over personal interest, and the power of individual choice in the face of overwhelming pressure. These themes resonated throughout the Knights-Errant organization, providing a philosophical foundation that helped its members maintain their dedication to the Emperor's cause despite the challenges they faced. The vessel's presence in various sectors often served as a rallying point for loyalist forces who might otherwise have felt isolated or abandoned. The ship's reputation as the vessel that had brought word of Horus's betrayal to Terra made it a symbol of hope and resistance that inspired Imperial personnel to continue fighting despite seemingly impossible odds. The psychological impact of the Eisenstein's presence could not be quantified in terms of firepower or tactical advantage, but its contribution to Imperial morale was immeasurable. The Eisenstein's operational security measures reflected the sensitive nature of its mission and the high-value targets it might encounter during its travels. The ship's identification codes and transponder signals were regularly updated to prevent enemy forces from tracking its movements. False flag operations were conducted to create confusion about the vessel's true purpose and destination. The ship's crew was trained in counterintelligence techniques to prevent the inadvertent disclosure of sensitive information to potential enemy agents. The transformation from Legion Brother to Knight-Errant demanded more than a simple change of allegiance. It required the complete reconstruction of identity itself. The warriors who had once found meaning in the genetic bonds that tied them to their primarchs now faced the daunting task of forging new loyalties based on principle rather than blood. This psychological metamorphosis proved to be one of the most challenging aspects of service within Malcador's organization, as individuals who had been conditioned from their earliest days as aspirants to revere their gene fathers as living gods struggled to redefine their understanding of duty and brotherhood. The internal conflicts that arose within the Knights-Errant reflected the fundamental tensions inherent in bringing together warriors from legions that had been bitter enemies during the Great Crusade. the rivalry between the Imperial Fists and Iron Warriors, the philosophical differences between the Ultramarines and World Eaters, and the cultural disparities between the Space Wolves and Thousand Sons had shaped the identities of countless Astartes over the decades. These deep-seated antagonisms could not be simply set aside through administrative decree, requiring careful management and the development of new frameworks for understanding inter-legion relationships. The process of abandoning one's legion brothers created wounds that never fully healed, leaving psychological scars that manifested in various ways throughout the Knights-Errant's service. Some operatives became obsessively focused on proving their loyalty to the Emperor, driving themselves to extremes of self-sacrifice and dedication that bordered on the destructive. Others developed a cynical detachment from all forms of institutional loyalty, viewing their service as a purely transactional relationship based on mutual benefit rather than deeper emotional bonds. The most successful Knights-Errant learned to channel their sense of loss into a more mature understanding of duty that transcended personal attachments. The challenge of maintaining unity among former enemies required the development of new traditions and rituals that could replace the Legion-specific customs that had previously defined Astartes' identity. The Knights-Errant began to develop their own ceremonies and observances that emphasized their shared service to the Emperor rather than their diverse origins. These new traditions drew upon elements from various Legion cultures, while avoiding the specific iconography and practices that might trigger old rivalries or remind operatives of their abandoned brothers. The psychological burden of betraying one's gene father manifested differently in each Knight-Errant, reflecting the unique relationship that each warrior had maintained with their primarch. Those who had served in legions, where the primarch maintained close personal relationships with his warriors, experienced the betrayal as a profound personal loss, while those from more distant or hierarchical legions found it easier to separate their loyalty to the Emperor from their feelings toward their gene father. The process of working through these complex emotions required specialized counseling and support systems that had never been necessary during the Great Crusade. Nathaniel Garrow's struggle with his abandonment of the Death Guard provided a template for understanding the psychological challenges faced by other Knights-Errant. The former captain had spent decades serving alongside battle brothers who had shared his experiences, understood his references, and provided the social support that made the isolation of Astartes' service bearable. His transition to the Knights-Errant required him to form new bonds with warriors whose backgrounds and perspectives differed radically from his own, creating a sense of displacement that persisted despite his intellectual understanding of the necessity of his choice. The integration of Tylos Rubio into the Knights-Errant illustrated the additional complications that arose when operatives came from legions that had been censured or disbanded. The Thousand Sons Codicil carried not only the burden of abandoning his brothers, but also the stigma associated with his legion's fall from grace. His psychic abilities, once valued as tools for advancing the Great Crusade, had become sources of suspicion and fear among many Imperial forces. The process of establishing trust with his new colleagues required him to demonstrate repeatedly that his powers could be used safely and effectively in service of the Emperor's cause. The specific incident that tested Rubio's resolve occurred during a mission to investigate reports of chaos corruption within an Imperial Guard regiment stationed on the world of Malech. The Codicil's psychic senses detected the presence of demonic influence among the regiment's officers, but his attempts to warn his Knights-Errant colleagues were met with skepticism and suspicion. The other operatives questioned whether his perceptions were accurate or whether his own connection to the warp might be influencing his judgment. The situation deteriorated when Rubio's psychic abilities manifested involuntarily during a moment of stress, causing several nearby Imperial Guardsmen to experience brief but intense hallucinations. The confrontation that followed forced Rubio to choose between maintaining his emotional control and protecting his fellow Knights-Errant from a demonic ambush that only he could perceive. His decision to unleash his full psychic potential to banish the emerging demon saved his colleagues' lives, but also confirmed their worst fears about the dangers of working alongside a psyker. The aftermath of the incident required extensive discussions about the role of psychic abilities within the organization and the development of new protocols for managing the risks associated with such powers. The challenge of forging new bonds among the Knights-Errant was complicated by the diverse backgrounds and experiences of the organization's membership. Warriors who had spent decades fighting alongside the same battle brothers found it difficult to develop the same level of trust and understanding with colleagues whose tactical doctrines, cultural practices, and personal philosophies differed significantly from their own. The process of building effective working relationships required patience, compromise, and a willingness to set aside preconceptions about warriors from different legions. The partnership between Tubal-Cain and Severian, the Wolf, exemplified both the potential and the challenges of inter-legion cooperation within the Knights-Errant. The Iron Hand's Tech Marine's analytical approach to problem-solving contrasted sharply with the Sons of Horus veterans' intuitive understanding of human nature and political dynamics. Their first joint mission, an investigation of suspected Mechanicum corruption on the Forge world of Lucius, nearly ended in disaster when their different approaches to gathering intelligence created conflicting operational requirements. Cain's systematic analysis of the Forge world's production records and technical specifications provided valuable insights into the scope of the corruption, but his methodical approach required extended periods of observation and data collection that left the team vulnerable to detection. Severian's preference for direct action and human intelligence gathering offered faster results but carried greater risks of exposure and confrontation. The resolution of their differences required both operatives to acknowledge the value of their colleagues' approach while adapting their own methods to complement rather than compete with each other. The role of Imperial faith in maintaining cohesion among the Knights-Errant became increasingly important as the organization expanded beyond its original membership. The traditional Imperial truth, with its emphasis on reason and rejection of superstition, had been severely undermined by the revelations about the warp and the reality of demonic entities. The Knights-Errant found themselves operating in a universe where supernatural forces were demonstrably real, and where their enemies drew power from sources that conventional Imperial doctrine had dismissed as primitive mythology. The emerging Imperial cult provided a new framework for understanding the Emperor's role in humanity's struggle against the forces of chaos. This developing theology emphasized the Emperor's divine nature and his role as humanity's protector against existential threats that transcended the material realm. The Knights-Errant, as direct servants of the Emperor's will, found themselves at the forefront of this theological evolution, their experiences with chaos corruption providing practical validation for beliefs that might otherwise have been dismissed as superstition. The transformation of the organization's chapel aboard the Eisenstein reflected this theological shift. The original Death Guard iconography had been replaced with symbols that emphasized the Emperor's divine authority and his protection of humanity against the forces of darkness. The chamber's design incorporated elements from various Imperial traditions while avoiding the specific imagery that might remind operatives of their abandoned legions. The result was a space that could accommodate the spiritual needs of personnel from diverse backgrounds while reinforcing their shared commitment to the Emperor's cause. The psychological impact of this theological evolution extended beyond simple changes in religious observance. The Knights-Errant began to understand their service not merely as a military obligation, but as a sacred duty that transcended personal desires and attachments. This shift in perspective helped many operatives process the trauma of abandoning their Legion brothers by providing a higher purpose that justified their sacrifice. The development of this quasi-religious framework for understanding their role would prove crucial for maintaining the organization's cohesion during the darkest periods of the heresy. The specific incident that tested the faith of the entire organization occurred during a mission to recover Imperial refugees from the world of Calth following the Word-Bearer's surprise attack on the Ultramarines. The Knights-Errant team assigned to the evacuation operation encountered a group of survivors who had been exposed to chaos corruption, but had not yet succumbed to its influence. The refugees included children whose parents had been killed during the initial assault, elderly civilians who lacked the physical strength to endure extended evacuation procedures, and wounded Imperial Army personnel who required immediate medical attention. The discovery that several of the refugees showed signs of incipient chaos corruption created a moral dilemma that tested the Knights-Errant's understanding of their duty and the nature of mercy. Standard Imperial protocol required the immediate execution of anyone showing signs of chaos taint, but the affected individuals included children who had no understanding of what was happening to them and wounded soldiers who had fought bravely in defense of their world. The decision of whether to follow protocol or attempt to save the corrupted refugees forced the team to confront fundamental questions about the nature of their service and the limits of acceptable sacrifice. The resolution of this crisis required the Knights-Errant to develop new approaches to dealing with chaos corruption that balanced the need for security with their obligation to protect Imperial citizens. The Team Psyker was able to identify individuals whose corruption was still in its early stages and might be reversible through proper treatment, while those whose taint had progressed beyond hope of recovery were granted the Emperor's mercy through quick and painless execution. The development of these protocols represented a significant evolution in the organization's understanding of its role and responsibilities. The challenge of maintaining operational security while building trust among team members created additional stress for Knights-Errant operatives. The compartmentalized nature of their missions meant that individuals often lacked complete information about their colleagues' backgrounds and capabilities, making it difficult to develop the deep personal bonds that characterize traditional Astartes brotherhoods. The need to maintain cover identities and operational security protocols further complicated the process of building effective working relationships. The psychological support systems developed for Knights-Errant personnel reflected the unique stresses associated with their service. The organization's Medicae specialists worked closely with chaplains and counselors to provide comprehensive care for operatives who might be struggling with the emotional burden of their choices. These support systems incorporated elements from various Imperial traditions while adapting to the specific needs of warriors who had abandoned their original identities in service of a higher cause. The training regimen developed for new Knights-Errant recruits emphasized the importance of psychological resilience and the ability to form new bonds despite past trauma. The curriculum included exercises designed to help operatives process their feelings about their abandoned brothers while developing new frameworks for understanding loyalty and duty. The success of these programs was measured not only by operational effectiveness, but also by the psychological well-being of the personnel involved. The development of new command structures within the Knights-Errant reflected the organization's need to balance operational effectiveness with the psychological needs of its personnel. The traditional Astartes hierarchy, based on rank and seniority, was supplemented with systems that emphasized competence and mission compatibility. This approach allowed operatives to work with colleagues whose skills complemented their own, while avoiding the potential conflicts that might arise from forcing warriors from rival legions to work within traditional command structures. The long-term psychological effects of service as a Knight-Errant would continue to influence the organization's members long after the heresy had ended. The experience of abandoning one's original identity and forging new bonds based on shared principles rather than genetic heritage created a unique form of brotherhood that transcended traditional legion loyalties. This evolution in understanding would prove crucial for the development of future Imperial institutions that would need to operate across traditional factional boundaries. The role of ritual and ceremony in maintaining unit cohesion became increasingly important as the Knights-Errant developed their own traditions and customs. These new observances drew upon elements from various Imperial cultures while avoiding the specific practices that might remind operatives of their abandoned legions. The development of these traditions represented a conscious effort to create new forms of identity and belonging that could replace the bonds that had been severed when the operatives chose to serve the emperor directly. The challenge of integrating mortal personnel into the Knights-Errant created additional complications for maintaining unit cohesion. The vast differences in lifespan, physical capabilities, and cultural background between Astartes and baseline humans required the development of new approaches to team building and leadership. The success of these integration efforts would provide valuable lessons for future imperial organizations that would need to coordinate the activities of diverse personnel types. The final assault on the throne world transformed the Knights-Errant from an elite covert organization into a crucial component of the Imperium's last stand against the forces of chaos. As Horus's armada translated from the warp at the edge of the Sol system, the scattered operatives of Malcador's creation found themselves recalled to Terra to participate in the defense of humanity's birth world. The transition from independent operations across the galaxy to integration within the massive defensive apparatus coordinated by Rogel Dorn required fundamental changes in how the Knights-Errant operated, forcing them to adapt their methods to the demands of conventional warfare while maintaining their unique capabilities. The integration of the Knights-Errant into Dorn's defensive strategy presented both opportunities and challenges that tested the organization's adaptability. The Praetorian of Terra had spent years fortifying the Imperial Palace and surrounding territories, creating layered defenses that could theoretically withstand even the combined might of the traitor legions. However, the conventional nature of these preparations left gaps that could only be filled by forces capable of operating outside traditional military doctrine. The Knights-Errant's experience with unconventional warfare and their intimate knowledge of traitor legion capabilities made them invaluable assets for addressing these vulnerabilities. Rogel Dorn's initial skepticism regarding the Knights-Errant reflected his preference for clear command structures and established military protocols. The Imperial Fist's primarch viewed the organization's independence and direct reporting to Malcador as potential sources of confusion and conflict within the broader defensive command structure. His methodical approach to warfare emphasized coordination and mutual support between different elements of the defending forces, principles that seemed incompatible with the Knights-Errant's traditional operational methods. The process of convincing Dorn to fully utilize the organization's capabilities required careful negotiation and the demonstration of their unique value in specific tactical situations. The establishment of the Knights-Errant command post within the Imperial Palace's defensive complex required extensive coordination with existing Imperial Fist's installations. The organization's personnel needed access to intelligence networks, communication systems, and logistical support while maintaining their operational independence and security protocols. The physical location chosen for their headquarters reflected the delicate balance between integration and autonomy that characterized their role in the defense. Situated within the palace's middle defensive ring, the facility provided secure access to strategic command centers while remaining sufficiently isolated to protect sensitive operations from potential compromise. The counterintelligence operations conducted by the Knights-Errant during the siege represented one of their most critical contributions to the defense of Terra. The Traitor Legion's assault on the Throne World was preceded by extensive infiltration efforts designed to gather intelligence about defensive preparations and identify potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited during the main attack. The conventional security forces responsible for protecting the palace and its surrounding territories lacked the specialized knowledge and experience necessary to detect and counter these sophisticated infiltration attempts. Nathaniel Garrow's leadership of the counterintelligence effort drew upon his extensive experience with both Death Guard tactics and the broader patterns of chaos corruption that had been observed throughout the heresy. His intimate knowledge of how the traitor legions operated allowed him to anticipate their infiltration methods and develop countermeasures that could neutralize their agents before they could gather useful intelligence or conduct sabotage operations. The former Death Guard captain's ability to think like his corrupted former brothers proved invaluable for predicting their actions and staying ahead of their infiltration efforts. The hunt for infiltrators within the palace complex required the Knights-Errant to work closely with existing security forces while maintaining their operational independence. The Legio Custodes, with their unparalleled loyalty and combat effectiveness, provided crucial support for operations that required absolute discretion and reliability. The golden-armored Guardians' presence during sensitive counterintelligence operations ensured that any discovered infiltrators could be eliminated before they could compromise the broader defensive effort. The collaboration between the Knights-Errant and the Custodes demonstrated the effectiveness of combining different types of elite forces for specialized missions. The identification of Alpha Legion infiltrators within the palace's administrative staff exemplified the sophisticated nature of the threats facing the defenders. The 20th Legion's agents had spent months establishing cover identities and infiltrating various imperial institutions, using their positions to gather intelligence about defensive preparations and identify potential targets for sabotage. Their ability to assume the identities of loyal imperial personnel made them extremely difficult to detect through conventional security measures, requiring the specialized knowledge and investigative techniques that the Knights-Errant had developed during their operations across the galaxy. Tylos Rubio's psychic abilities proved particularly valuable for detecting the subtle signs of chaos corruption that might indicate the presence of infiltrators. The Thousand Suns Codicier's enhanced perception allowed him to identify individuals whose psychic emanations suggested exposure to warp influence or the presence of concealed demonic entities. His ability to probe the surface thoughts of suspected infiltrators provided crucial intelligence about their missions and contacts, enabling the Knights-Errant to roll up entire enemy networks before they could complete their objectives. The specific incident that demonstrated the effectiveness of the Knights-Errant's counterintelligence operations occurred during the early stages of the siege, when Alpha Legion infiltrators attempted to sabotage the palace's primary communication array. The enemy agents had spent weeks preparing for the operation, gathering intelligence about the facility's security protocols and identifying the optimal timing for their attack. Their plan involved simultaneous strikes against multiple critical components of the communication system, creating cascading failures that would disrupt coordination between different elements of the defending forces. The Knights-Errant's detection of the infiltration attempt began with routine security sweeps that identified anomalies in personnel records and access logs. Severian the Wolf's expertise in covert operations allowed him to recognize the subtle signs of professional infiltration that might have been overlooked by conventional security personnel. His investigation revealed a pattern of seemingly unrelated incidents that, when analyzed together, suggested the presence of a coordinated enemy operation. The discovery of forged identification documents and modified security credentials confirmed the presence of hostile agents within the palace complex. The operation to neutralize the Alpha Legion infiltrators required careful coordination between multiple elements of the palace's security forces. The Knights-Errant provided the specialized knowledge and tactical expertise necessary to counter the enemy agents' sophisticated operational methods, while the Custodes contributed their unmatched combat effectiveness and absolute reliability. The Imperial Fist security detachments provided additional manpower and their intimate knowledge of the palace's layout and defensive systems. The successful elimination of the infiltrators prevented what could have been a catastrophic disruption of the defenders' communication capabilities at a critical moment in the siege. The integration of the Knights-Errant with Imperial Fist's command structures required the development of new protocols and procedures that could accommodate the organization's unique operational methods. The 7th Legion's emphasis on discipline and adherence to established doctrine initially conflicted with the Knights-Errant's preference for flexibility and independent action. The resolution of these differences required extensive discussions between the organization's leadership and the development of compromise solutions that preserved the effectiveness of both forces while enabling effective cooperation. The establishment of joint operations centers within the palace complex facilitated coordination between the Knights-Errant and Imperial Fist's forces, while maintaining the security protocols necessary for sensitive operations. These facilities provided secure communication links between different elements of the defending forces and enabled real-time coordination of counterintelligence and security operations. The staff assigned to these centers included personnel from both organizations who had been specially trained in joint operations procedures and cross-organizational coordination. The specific missions assigned to the Knights-Errant during the siege reflected their unique capabilities and the particular challenges facing the defenders. While the main body of Imperial forces prepared to repel the Traitor Legion's direct assault on the palace walls, the Knights-Errant conducted specialized operations that conventional forces could not attempt. These missions included the elimination of high-value enemy targets, the protection of critical infrastructure, and the investigation of suspected security breaches that might compromise the broader defensive effort. The assassination of the Word-Bearer's Dark Apostle Erebus during his infiltration of the palace's lower levels demonstrated the Knights-Errant's ability to eliminate threats that conventional forces might struggle to address. The chaplain's presence within the palace complex had been detected through psychic monitoring systems that identified his powerful warp signature, but his extensive knowledge of Imperial security protocols and his supernatural abilities made him an extremely dangerous opponent. The mission to eliminate him required a team of Knights-Errant with diverse capabilities and specialized equipment designed to counter his chaos-enhanced abilities. The operation began with extensive reconnaissance to determine Erebus's exact location and the nature of his mission within the palace. Intelligence gathered through psychic scanning and conventional surveillance suggested that the Dark Apostle was attempting to corrupt key personnel within the palace's command structure, using his charismatic abilities and supernatural influence to turn loyal Imperial servants against their oaths. The scope of his potential impact on the defensive effort made his elimination a top priority for the Knights-Errant leadership. The assault team assembled for the mission included Garo for his tactical expertise and leadership capabilities, Rubio for his psychic abilities and knowledge of chaos sorcery, and Kane for his technical skills and cybernetic enhancements. The diverse backgrounds and capabilities of the team members provided the flexibility necessary to adapt to changing circumstances during the operation. Their equipment included specialized weapons, blessed by the Emperor's own chaplains and protective gear, designed to resist the corrupting influence of chaos entities. The confrontation with Erebus took place in the depths of the palace's ancient foundations, where the Dark Apostle had established a makeshift shrine to the Chaos Gods. The chamber's walls were covered with blasphemous symbols that seemed to writhe and shift in the flickering light of unholy flames, while the air itself felt thick with malevolent presence. The Word-Bearer's physical form showed the extent of his corruption, with his once noble features twisted into a mockery of their former appearance, and his armor fused with demonic flesh and bone. The battle itself tested the Knights-Errant's training and equipment against one of the most dangerous servants of the ruinous powers. Erebus's centuries of experience with chaos sorcery made him a formidable opponent whose abilities transcended conventional combat techniques. His psychic attacks targeted the Knights-Errant's minds and souls rather than their physical forms, attempting to corrupt their thoughts and turn them against each other. The protective rituals and blessed equipment that the team carried provided some defense against these supernatural assaults, but the confrontation required them to draw upon reserves of faith and determination that went beyond their military training. The successful elimination of Erebus represented a significant victory for the Knights-Errant and demonstrated their value to the broader defensive effort. The Dark Apostle's death prevented what could have been a catastrophic corruption of key personnel within the palace's command structure, while the intelligence gathered during the operation provided valuable insights into the Traitor Legion's broader infiltration efforts. The mission's success also validated the organization's specialized training and equipment, proving that properly prepared Imperial forces could successfully engage and defeat even the most dangerous servants of chaos. The protection of key installations within the palace complex required the Knights-Errant to develop new approaches to defensive operations that could counter the diverse threats posed by the traitor legions. The conventional defensive preparations implemented by the Imperial Fists were designed to repel direct military assault, but they were less effective against the subtle infiltration and sabotage techniques employed by forces like the Alpha Legion and Night Lords. The Knights-Errant's experience with unconventional warfare made them ideally suited for addressing these vulnerabilities. The defense of the palace's primary astropathic facility exemplified the specialized nature of the Knights-Errant's defensive missions. The facility's psychic choir provided crucial communication links between the defending forces and loyalist elements throughout the galaxy, making it a high-priority target for enemy infiltration and sabotage. The conventional security forces assigned to protect the facility lacked the specialized knowledge necessary to detect and counter psychic threats, requiring the Knights-Errant to develop new security protocols and defensive measures. The integration of Amendora Kendall's null field abilities into the facility's defensive systems provided protection against psychic infiltration and demonic manifestation that conventional security measures could not address. Her presence created zones of psychic dead space that prevented enemy psykers from using their abilities to gather intelligence or conduct sabotage operations. The psychological effect of her null field on the facility's astropathic personnel required careful management to ensure that the protective measures did not interfere with their ability to perform their duties. The Knights-Errant's role in the final confrontation at the Imperial Palace reflected their evolution from a covert organization into a crucial component of the Imperium's military apparatus. As the traitor legions breached the palace's outer defenses and fighting moved into the corridors and chambers of humanity's most sacred site, the specialized skills and unique capabilities of the Knights-Errant became increasingly valuable. Their ability to operate independently and adapt to rapidly changing circumstances made them ideally suited for the chaotic urban warfare that characterized the siege's final stages. The defense of the Sanctum Imperialis required the Knights-Errant to coordinate their efforts with multiple elements of the palace's garrison while maintaining their operational flexibility. The chamber's significance as the heart of imperial power made it a primary target for the traitor forces, who understood that its capture would represent a devastating blow to loyalist morale. The conventional defenses surrounding the sanctum were formidable, but they required supplementation by forces capable of responding to unexpected threats and unconventional attack methods. The Knights-Errant's contribution to the defense included the establishment of mobile reaction forces that could respond rapidly to enemy breakthrough attempts, the implementation of counter-infiltration measures designed to prevent enemy agents from reaching critical areas, and the coordination of intelligence gathering efforts that provided early warning of enemy movements and intentions. Their diverse backgrounds and specialized training enabled them to address threats that conventional forces might struggle to counter, while their independence from traditional command structures allowed them to respond rapidly to changing circumstances without waiting for authorization through established channels. The final days of the Siege of Terra marked not just the climax of the Horus Heresy, but the fundamental transformation of the Knights-Errant from a wartime expedient into the foundation of a permanent imperial institution. As the Emperor's broken form was interred within the Golden Throne, and the Imperium began the painful process of rebuilding from the ashes of civil war, Malcador's vision for his elite organization underwent its most significant evolution. The Sigillite's death during the siege had removed the Knights-Errant's primary patron and protector, leaving them vulnerable to dissolution or absorption by other imperial institutions. Yet the very chaos of the post-heresy period created opportunities for the organization to reinvent itself and establish a permanent place within the emerging imperial hierarchy. The immediate aftermath of the siege saw the surviving Knights-Errant scattered across Terra and the Sol system, their operational structure disrupted by the massive casualties suffered during the final battles. Nathaniel Garrow found himself coordinating the remnants of the organization from a temporary command post established within the ruins of the Imperial Palace, working to maintain contact with operatives who had been dispersed during the fighting. The communication networks that had previously linked the Knights-Errant to their missions across the galaxy had been severely damaged by the siege, requiring new approaches to coordination and command that could function in the degraded conditions that characterized the post-war period. The survival of key personnel like Garrow, Tylos Rubio, and Eacton Cruz provided continuity between the wartime organization and its post-heresy evolution. These veterans carried within their scarred minds the accumulated experience and institutional knowledge that would prove crucial for establishing the Knights-Errant's successor organizations. Their understanding of operational procedures, recruitment criteria, and the unique challenges associated with combating chaos corruption formed the foundation upon which future imperial institutions would be built. The informal networks of trust and cooperation that had developed between these individuals during the heresy provided the personal relationships necessary to navigate the complex political environment of the post-war imperium. The formal establishment of the Inquisition represented the culmination of ideas and approaches that had been developing within the Knights-Errant throughout the heresy. The concept of an organization with the authority to investigate any imperial institution or individual, regardless of rank or position, had been tested and refined through years of covert operations against chaos infiltration. The Knights-Errant's experience with identifying and countering corruption within the imperial hierarchy provided practical validation for theories about the need for independent oversight and investigation capabilities. Their operational methods, recruitment procedures, and organizational structure served as templates for the emerging Inquisition's own development. The integration of Knights-Errant leadership into the nascent Inquisition required careful negotiation between the organization's surviving members and the new imperial authorities who were establishing the post-heresy governmental structure. The Council of Terra, reconstituted in the wake of Malcador's death, recognized the value of the Knights-Errant's experience and expertise, while also seeking to establish clear lines of authority and accountability for the new organization. The process of transforming an informal network of elite operatives into a formal imperial institution involved extensive discussions about jurisdiction, authority, and the proper limits of investigative power. Garrow's appointment as one of the first Grand Masters of the Inquisition reflected both his personal qualifications and the broader recognition of the Knights-Errant's contributions to the imperial cause. His experience with combating chaos corruption, his demonstrated loyalty to the Emperor, and his understanding of the operational challenges facing the new organization made him an ideal candidate for senior leadership. The former Death Guard captain's transformation from Legion officer to Knight-Errant to Inquisitor exemplified the evolution of imperial service, from the relatively simple loyalties of the Great Crusade to the complex realities of the post-heresy galaxy. The transition of leadership from the informal networks that had characterized the Knights-Errant to the formal hierarchies of the Inquisition required the development of new command structures and administrative procedures. The wartime organization had operated with minimal bureaucracy, relying on personal relationships and shared understanding to coordinate operations. The post-heresy Inquisition needed more formal systems to manage larger numbers of personnel and coordinate activities across multiple sectors. The challenge lay in maintaining the operational flexibility and independence that had made the Knights-Errant effective while establishing the institutional structures necessary for long-term sustainability. The organizational restructuring that accompanied this transition involved the creation of new ranks and positions that could accommodate the diverse backgrounds and capabilities of former Knights-Errant personnel. The traditional military hierarchies that had governed imperial forces during the Great Crusade proved inadequate for an organization that needed to operate across institutional boundaries and investigate potential corruption at any level of imperial society. The development of the Inquisition's unique rank structure drew upon the Knights-Errant's experience with flexible command arrangements, while incorporating elements from other imperial institutions that could provide stability and legitimacy. The expansion of recruitment beyond the Astartes represented one of the most significant changes in the organization's evolution from Knights-Errant to Inquisition. The wartime organization had initially focused on recruiting warriors from the Space Marine legions, with limited inclusion of mortal personnel in specialized roles. The post-heresy Inquisition needed to cast a much wider net, drawing upon the full spectrum of imperial society to find individuals with the skills and dedication necessary for investigative work. This expansion reflected both the practical requirements of the new organization and the recognition that the threats facing the Imperium required diverse approaches and perspectives. The recruitment of mortal agents brought new capabilities and challenges that required significant adaptations to existing training and operational procedures. Baseline humans lacked the enhanced physiology and psychological conditioning of the Astartes, but they possessed other advantages that made them valuable assets for investigative work. Their shorter lifespans created a sense of urgency that could be beneficial for time-sensitive operations, while their closer connection to ordinary imperial citizens provided insights that superhuman warriors might miss. The integration of these mortal agents required the development of new support systems and operational protocols that could accommodate their unique needs and limitations. The inclusion of specialists from various imperial institutions reflected the Inquisition's need for technical expertise and specialized knowledge that went beyond the military capabilities of the original Knights-Errant. Adepts from the Administratum brought bureaucratic skills and knowledge of imperial governmental procedures, while Tech Marines and Mechanicum personnel provided technical expertise for investigating suspected corruption within the Imperium's technological infrastructure. Sanctioned psychers offered abilities that were crucial for detecting and countering chaos influence, while members of the ecclesiarchy contributed theological knowledge and spiritual guidance. The development of the Inquisition's distinctive organizational culture drew heavily upon the Knights-Errant's experience with operating outside traditional imperial hierarchies. The concept of individual inquisitors having broad authority to pursue investigations according to their own judgment reflected the wartime organization's emphasis on operational independence and personal responsibility. The tradition of recruiting agents from diverse backgrounds and allowing them to develop their own operational methods built upon the Knights-Errant's experience with integrating personnel from different legions and institutions. The evolution of operational doctrine from wartime expedients to post-heresy institution required fundamental changes in how the organization approached its missions and responsibilities. The Knights-Errant had operated in a crisis environment where immediate results often took precedence over long-term considerations. The post-heresy Inquisition needed to develop more sustainable approaches that could function effectively over extended periods without the urgency and resource availability that had characterized the wartime period. This transition involved the development of new training programs, operational procedures, and support systems that could maintain effectiveness while operating within the constraints of peacetime imperial governance. The establishment of permanent training facilities represented a significant departure from the ad hoc instruction methods that had characterized the Knights-Errant's approach to preparing new operatives. The wartime organization had relied heavily on the job training and mentorship relationships between experienced operatives and new recruits. The post-heresy Inquisition needed more systematic approaches to education and training that could prepare large numbers of personnel for the diverse challenges they would face. These facilities incorporated lessons learned from the Knights-Errant's experience while adapting to the different requirements of peacetime operations. The development of specialized training programs for different types of Inquisition personnel reflected the organization's growing complexity and the diverse skills required for effective investigation of suspected corruption. Programs for interrogators focused on developing the psychological and technical skills necessary for extracting information from reluctant subjects. Training for acolytes emphasized research techniques and administrative procedures that could support more senior investigators. Specialized courses for technical personnel provided instruction in the detection and analysis of various forms of corruption and heresy. The creation of formal doctrine and procedures represented a significant departure from the informal methods that had characterized the Knights-Errant's operations. The wartime organization had relied heavily on the personal experience and judgment of its operatives, with minimal written guidance or standardized procedures. The post-heresy Inquisition needed more formal systems that could ensure consistency and effectiveness across a much larger organization. The development of these doctrinal frameworks drew upon the accumulated experience of the Knights-Errant while incorporating lessons learned from other imperial institutions. The establishment of regional commands and administrative structures reflected the Inquisition's need to coordinate activities across the vast expanse of the Imperium while maintaining the operational independence that had made the Knights-Errant effective. The wartime organization had operated primarily from the Eisenstein and other mobile platforms, with minimal fixed infrastructure. The post-heresy Inquisition needed permanent facilities and administrative systems that could support operations across multiple sectors while maintaining the security and flexibility necessary for investigative work. The integration of the Inquisition with other imperial institutions required careful negotiation and the development of new protocols for cooperation and coordination. The Knights-Errant had operated with broad authority from Malcador, but the post-heresy organization needed to establish more formal relationships with the Administratum, the Imperial Guard, the Space Marine chapters, and other elements of the imperial hierarchy. These relationships needed to balance the Inquisition's need for independence and authority with the broader requirements of imperial governance and military effectiveness. The development of the Inquisition's intelligence networks built upon the contacts and relationships that had been established by the Knights-Errant during their operations across the galaxy. The wartime organization had developed extensive networks of informants and allies within various imperial institutions, providing access to information and resources that would prove crucial for the new organization's effectiveness. The challenge lay in maintaining these relationships while adapting them to the different requirements and capabilities of the post-heresy Inquisition. The establishment of the Inquisition's unique legal authority represented one of the most significant departures from traditional imperial governance structures. The Knights-Errant had operated with broad but informal authority from Malcador, relying on their patron's influence and the crisis conditions of the heresy to overcome jurisdictional challenges. The post-heresy Inquisition needed formal legal frameworks that could provide the authority necessary for effective investigation, while establishing clear limits and accountability mechanisms. The creation of the Inquisition's distinctive iconography and ceremonial traditions drew upon elements from the Knights-Errant's own evolving culture, while incorporating symbols and practices that would establish the new organization's legitimacy and authority. The use of the inquisitorial rosette as a symbol of authority reflected the need for a distinctive identifier that could be recognized across the Imperium. The development of formal ceremonies and rituals provided ways to reinforce the organization's values and traditions while creating bonds between personnel from diverse backgrounds. The evolution of equipment and resources from the improvised solutions that had characterized the Knights-Errant to the specialized tools and technologies of the Inquisition required significant investment and development. The wartime organization had relied heavily on modified standard equipment and improvised solutions to meet their operational requirements. The post-heresy Inquisition needed more sophisticated tools and technologies that could support the complex investigative work that would become their primary mission. The establishment of the Inquisition's relationship with the emerging Space Marine chapters, represented a crucial aspect of the organization's evolution from its Knights-Errant origins. Many of the original operatives had come from the Space Marine legions, and the new organization needed to maintain access to Astartes' capabilities while adapting to the changed structure of post-heresy imperial military forces. The development of formal relationships with the chapters required careful negotiation and the establishment of new protocols for cooperation and support. The transformation of the Knights-Errant's informal networks into the Inquisition's formal structure represented the culmination of an evolutionary process that had begun during the earliest days of the Horus Heresy. The wartime organization had developed in response to immediate crises and specific threats, but its methods and approaches had proven valuable enough to justify institutionalization. The post-heresy Inquisition represented the formalization of these proven techniques and their adaptation to the long-term challenges facing the Imperium. The legacy of the Knights-Errant within the emerging Inquisition extended beyond simple organizational continuity to encompass fundamental approaches to understanding and combating the threats facing humanity. The wartime organization's experience with chaos corruption had provided practical insights into the nature of these threats and the methods necessary to counter them. The post-heresy Inquisition built upon this foundation while developing new capabilities and approaches that could address the evolving challenges of the 31st millennium and beyond. The aftermath of the Emperor's internment within the Golden Throne created a power vacuum that threatened to tear apart the fragile unity that had held the Imperium together during its darkest hour. As the surviving Primarchs departed Terra to establish their new domains, and the Council of Terra struggled to maintain governmental continuity, Malcador's final sacrifice became the catalyst for the most secretive and specialized military organization in Imperial history. The Sigillite's death had not merely ended his direct oversight of the Knights-Errant, it had transformed his accumulated psychic power and millennia of wisdom into the foundation upon which humanity's ultimate weapon against chaos would be built. The selection of specific Knights-Errant for the Grey Knights chapter's foundation represented the culmination of years of careful observation and evaluation. Malcador had not simply chosen the most skilled warriors from his organization, but rather those individuals whose psychological profiles and demonstrated resistance to chaos corruption made them ideal candidates for the specialized role they would fulfill. The process had begun months before the siege's conclusion, with the Sigillite conducting private interviews with selected operatives to assess their suitability for duties that would transcend even the extraordinary service they had already provided. Nathaniel Garrow's exclusion from the final selection surprised many within the Knights-Errant, given his role as the organization's de facto leader and his unwavering loyalty throughout the heresy. The former Death Guard captain's destiny lay elsewhere, his experience and leadership abilities needed for the emerging Inquisition that would carry forward the Knights-Errant's investigative mission. His understanding of chaos corruption and his proven ability to resist its influence made him invaluable for training future generations of Imperial agents, but his very visibility and known history made him unsuitable for the absolute secrecy that would shroud the Grey Knights' existence. The 8 Knights-Errant chosen for the Grey Knights Foundation each brought unique capabilities and perspectives that would shape the chapter's character for millennia to come. Their diverse origins, spanning multiple legions and including both Astartes and mortal personnel, reflected Malcador's understanding that the threat of chaos required equally diverse responses. The selection process had considered not just their individual qualifications, but how their combined abilities would create a synergistic effect that exceeded the sum of their parts. Tylos Rubio's inclusion among the chosen reflected the critical importance of psychic abilities in combating demonic threats. The former Thousand Sons codicier had demonstrated throughout his service with the Knights-Errant that psychic powers could be wielded safely and effectively against chaos when properly disciplined and focused. His experience with the corrupted sorcery of his former legion provided invaluable insights into the nature of warp-based threats, while his proven resistance to corruption made him an ideal candidate for the specialized training that would define the Grey Knight's approach to psychic warfare. The Codicier's physical transformation during the Grey Knight's creation process involved more than the standard genetic modifications applied to Astartes. His psychic abilities were enhanced and refined through techniques that Malcador had developed specifically for combating demonic entities. The process required the careful integration of psychic dampeners and amplifiers that could channel his powers with unprecedented precision while protecting him from the corrupting influence of the warp. His modified psychic hood incorporated crystalline matrices that had been blessed by the Emperor himself, creating a focus for his abilities that could pierce even the most sophisticated demonic illusions. Eacton Crew's selection represented the value of experience and wisdom in the eternal war against chaos. The veteran's centuries of service had given him an intuitive understanding of human nature and the subtle signs of corruption that younger warriors might miss. His marginalization within the Sons of Horus had actually strengthened his resistance to chaos influence, as his adherence to older traditions and values had immunized him against the philosophical shifts that had corrupted his former legion. The half-herd would become a cornerstone of the Grey Knight's institutional memory, his experiences during the Great Crusade providing context and perspective for the chapter's evolving doctrine. The integration of mortal personnel into the Grey Knight's foundation challenged traditional assumptions about the nature of Astartes' organizations. Amendora Kendall's null field abilities made her invaluable for operations against psychic threats, but her baseline human physiology required unprecedented adaptations to the gene seed implantation process. The procedures developed for her transformation would establish precedents for future recruitment from the Sisters of Silence and other specialized imperial organizations. Her survival of the enhancement process demonstrated that properly motivated and conditioned mortals could transcend their biological limitations when serving a cause greater than themselves. The establishment of Titan as the Grey Knight's fortress monastery reflected Malcador's understanding that the chapter would require absolute secrecy and isolation to fulfill their mission effectively. The moon's location within the Sol system provided security and accessibility while maintaining the symbolic connection to Terra that would reinforce the chapter's direct service to the Emperor. The fortress monastery's construction incorporated advanced concealment technologies and psychic shielding that would hide its presence from all but the most determined investigation. The facility's design emphasized functionality over grandeur, with every element optimized for the specialized training and operations that would define the Grey Knight's existence. The fortress monastery's training facilities represented a revolutionary approach to Astartes' conditioning that went far beyond conventional military instruction. The Grey Knights would need to master not just the arts of war, but the esoteric knowledge necessary to combat enemies that existed partially outside the material realm. The training chambers incorporated psychic isolation fields that could simulate the conditions encountered during demonic manifestations, allowing neophytes to develop their abilities in controlled environments. The libraries contained texts and artifacts that were considered too dangerous for any other imperial institution, their contents accessible only to those who had proven their absolute incorruptibility. The specialized training regimens developed for the Grey Knights drew upon Malcador's millennia of experience with psychic phenomena and the accumulated knowledge of the Knights-Errant's encounters with chaos corruption. The curriculum emphasized mental discipline and spiritual fortitude above physical prowess, though the chapter's warriors would still receive the finest combat training available within the Imperium. The process of creating a Grey Knight required years of conditioning that would forge an unbreakable will and an absolute dedication to the Emperor's cause. The psychological preparation involved exposure to carefully controlled chaos influences that would test the candidate's resistance while building immunity to future corruption. The development of the Grey Knight's unique equipment and weapons reflected the specialized nature of their mission and the extraordinary resources that Malcador had accumulated during his service as the Emperor's right hand. The chapter's force weapons incorporated psychic focusing crystals that had been blessed by the Emperor himself, creating tools that could channel the wielder's psychic abilities with unprecedented precision and power. The Nemesis weapons that would become the chapter's signature armament represented the pinnacle of Imperial technology, their construction requiring techniques and materials that were known only to the most senior members of the Mechanicum. The Grey Knight's power armor incorporated protective systems that went far beyond the standard equipment issued to other Astartes chapters. The hexagrammic wards etched into every surface provided protection against demonic influence, while the psychic dampeners built into the helmet systems could shield the wearer from mental assault. The armor's machine spirit was specially consecrated and conditioned to resist corruption, creating a symbiotic relationship between warrior and equipment that enhanced both components' effectiveness against supernatural threats. The chapter's recruitment protocols established standards that exceeded even the rigorous selection criteria employed by other elite Imperial organizations. Potential candidates underwent extensive psychological evaluation and testing for psychic sensitivity, with only those who demonstrated exceptional mental fortitude and spiritual purity being considered for advancement. The process eliminated not just those who might be vulnerable to chaos corruption, but also those whose personalities or motivations might compromise the chapter's absolute secrecy. The resulting warriors possessed a level of dedication and incorruptibility that made them uniquely suited for their specialized role. The creation of the Grey Knight's command structure reflected the need for absolute unity of purpose and the elimination of potential sources of internal conflict. The chapter's leadership would be drawn exclusively from those who had proven their worth through service in the field, with advancement based on demonstrated ability and unwavering loyalty rather than political considerations or personal connections. The Grand Master who would lead the chapter would be chosen through a process that emphasized spiritual purity and tactical acumen above all other considerations. The establishment of the Grey Knight's relationship with other Imperial institutions required careful negotiation and the development of protocols that could maintain the chapter's secrecy while ensuring access to necessary resources and intelligence. The Inquisition would serve as the primary interface between the Grey Knights and the broader Imperial hierarchy, providing mission assignments and logistical support while maintaining the compartmentalization necessary for operational security. The relationship would be formalized through ancient oaths and binding ceremonies that would ensure cooperation while preventing unauthorized disclosure of the chapter's existence. The Grey Knight's operational doctrine emphasized precision and overwhelming force applied at the critical moment rather than sustained campaigns or prolonged engagements. The chapter's warriors would strike swiftly and decisively against demonic incursions, utilizing their specialized equipment and training to banish supernatural threats before they could establish a foothold in the material realm. The doctrine recognized that the chapter's small size made it unsuitable for conventional warfare, but their unique capabilities made them invaluable for addressing threats that conventional forces could not effectively counter. The development of the Grey Knight's liturgies and rituals drew upon the deepest traditions of Imperial spirituality while incorporating elements specifically designed to combat chaos influence. The chapter's ceremonies would serve multiple purposes, reinforcing the warrior's resistance to corruption while creating bonds of brotherhood that transcended individual identity. The ritual words and gestures would be carefully crafted to channel psychic energy in ways that enhanced the chapter's effectiveness while providing protection against supernatural retaliation. The Grey Knight's intelligence networks would be built upon the foundations established by the Knights-Errant, but with enhanced security protocols and more sophisticated analysis capabilities. The chapter's agents would monitor Imperial space for signs of demonic activity, coordinating with Inquisition operatives to identify threats before they could manifest fully. The intelligence gathered would be processed through systems that could detect patterns and connections that might escape conventional analysis, providing early warning of chaos incursions and enabling rapid response. The chapter's relationship with the Adeptus Mechanicus would be carefully managed to ensure access to advanced technology while maintaining operational security. Selected tech priests would be inducted into the chapter's secrets and bound by oaths that would prevent disclosure of sensitive information. These individuals would be responsible for maintaining the Grey Knight's specialized equipment and developing new technologies that could enhance their effectiveness against supernatural threats. The relationship would be formalized through ancient compacts that would ensure cooperation while protecting the chapter's most sensitive capabilities. The Grey Knight's medical facilities would incorporate advanced techniques for treating exposure to chaos, corruption, and psychic trauma. The chapter's apothecaries would be trained in procedures that went far beyond conventional Astartes medicine, including methods for detecting and countering subtle forms of spiritual contamination. The facilities would include specialized isolation chambers and purification systems that could cleanse warriors who had been exposed to particularly virulent forms of chaos influence. The continuation of the Knights-Errant ideals within the Grey Knights represented the ultimate expression of Malcador's vision for humanity's defense against existential threats. The chapter would embody the principles of absolute loyalty, moral clarity, and unwavering dedication that had characterized the original organization, but refined and focused to an unprecedented degree. The Grey Knights would serve as the Emperor's ultimate weapon against chaos, their very existence a testament to the power of human will and determination in the face of supernatural horror. The chapter's eternal vigil would begin immediately upon their formal establishment, with the first Grey Knights deploying to counter demonic incursions that conventional imperial forces had been unable to address. Their successes would remain largely unknown to the broader Imperium, their victories celebrated only within the chapter's own halls and the highest levels of the Inquisition. The secrecy that shrouded their existence would become both their greatest strength and their heaviest burden, as they fought humanity's most dangerous enemies in shadows and silence. The legacy of the Knights-Errant lived on not just in the Grey Knights' methods and traditions, but in their fundamental understanding of what it meant to serve the Emperor's will above all other considerations. The chapter would face challenges that would test their resolve and threaten their very existence, but the foundation laid by Malcador's chosen warriors would prove strong enough to endure. The Grey Knights would become the ultimate expression of the Knights-Errant's evolution, their specialized capabilities and unwavering dedication ensuring that humanity would never stand defenseless against the horrors of the warp. As the 31st millennium drew to a close, and the Imperium began its long transformation into the grim darkness of the far future, the Grey Knights stood ready to face whatever threats might emerge from the depths of chaos. Their creation represented the culmination of everything the Knights-Errant had learned and sacrificed during the Horus Heresy, their existence a final gift from Malcador to the species he had served so faithfully. In the eternal war against the forces of darkness, the Grey Knights would serve as humanity's ultimate guardians, their vigil unending and their dedication absolute.